Okay, so here we are. We already have two people here. Very nice. Thanks for coming. We have a new community member, the Curious Soul. Thank you very much for joining the English Hacks community. Which, by the way, if you guys want to support the channel here on YouTube, you can become a community member. There should be a join button underneath this video somewhere. And yeah, you can do that if you want. So we will start with some questions. If anybody has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to bring up some questions from this week. I still have some comments I need to answer from the other day. Okay. Why is that not hearted? Okay. Got some good feedback, some thanks. Hello, Curious Soul. I am good. How are you? And remember you told me before I just say like Tilly or Lily or something. Yeah, Tilly. I'm gonna pronounce it Tilly. I like that. How are you as well? Hope everything is good. Let me know if you have any questions. One thing I can bring up, actually, I see right here. So Tilly asked a question about the L's, and in the comments. Hello, David. Welcome, Professor Moore. Yeah, that seems very odd, very strange. I don't like it. Of course, it's going to be too much. So, but anyway, recently, Lily asked, is the oo sound in school and fool the same as in schooler and fooler? Or foolish, sorry, foolish. Fooler could also work, but and specifically, does schooler retain the L-colored oo sound? So my answer to that was quite long. To make sure I don't forget anything. So there's a couple things here, right? So the basic rule is if the L is at the end of a syllable, it's going to be the half L or the dark L. If it's at the start of a syllable, which it might do in linking, like schooler, foolish, it could become the full L, the light L sound. But as I mentioned in a recent lesson, Americans don't always follow that. We commonly break it, and you can just always keep that that L sound, the half L. But we also do commonly put instead of doing oo to ul and coloring it like ul, we will commonly put a small w between ool, ool, ool. And so there's actually, for school, for example, you can say school with an L-colored oo. You can say school with a small w between them. So there's two ways to pronounce that. That's perfectly fine. And then if you do schooler, so you can say schooler with the full L, the light L. You can say schooler with the half L. That's when we break the rule. That's fine. You can say schooler, schooler, schooler. So a little bit kind of weird there because it wants to change into the full L, but it's still perfectly fine. Schooler, schooler. We'll do that most commonly if we're like maybe trying to really emphasize like, oh no, he's a high schooler, schooler. Like we might sort of separate it out a little bit. But God, I get so many emails. Hey, it's sold. Yeah, eBay sale. So yeah, with the L-colored vowels, there's often more than one answer because we have the linking ability. So Very good. But anyway, if you guys have questions, we have 7 people here. 7 people and no questions. We also have 7 people and 5 likes. Come on, 2 people. Gotta like the video. Anyway, what else do we have? Oh, Lily also asked, can tour and lure be pronounced as tor and lore? And to me, so tour, tor, and then lure, lore. To me, tor sounds okay, but it seems kind of like a dialectical thing. I don't think it's standard. And then lore is actually, um, I mean, tor is the past tense of tear, so that is a word. But if you try to say lure as lore, it seems like you're saying lore instead of lure. And so I said no for that one. That I would not recommend that. But either way, I mean, you should say tour lure, um, not tor and lure. That would be the best option. Okay, Lily has another question here. The Canadian raising doesn't happen in word myself. Well, I'm not Canadian, so I don't know. I'm not an expert on all the intricate details of Canadian English. And with raising, so the only raising I'm familiar with is the like a before n and m with the back of the tongue raising. Um, so I'm not sure what this question is. Like, what should be raising? But I'll tell you how I say it, which would be myself, right? Myself. So maybe it's in that diphthong my. The Canadian raising happens in America too. Writer doesn't sound like writer in most parts of America. That's strange. If it doesn't, then you could have fooled me because I would tell you that uh, most Americans, including myself, pronounce writer and writer exactly the same. 100%. They are exactly the same pronunciation. So I don't know the source of that, like if you got that from Wikipedia or from another teacher or what. Maybe that's true and I just didn't know, but I would be very, very surprised if I ever heard an American say those 2 words differently. And they didn't have like a Southern accent or a New York accent or something. Even in those cases, I would expect them within the accent to say them probably the same. Um, but So yeah, if you can give me a source on that, Lily, like if it was from another teacher or something, or if it was like an article, I can look more into it and see why they're saying that and what's going on. Um, okay, so Curious Soul, did you get time to check my comment? You can do it when, yeah. I'm a little bit behind on the comments, because I have a lot going on, a lot going on. But I have them in mind. I know I have to respond to you, and I have one comment, 1 or 2 comments from I don't know that I have to respond to, and there might be another one. Um, so, I mean, I generally try to get to comments pretty quickly. Um, but I've also found that if because I'll get the notification on my phone and then I'll answer it. Maybe I'm in the middle of doing something else, and so that distracts me and takes time. So I'm trying to set up like a time maybe like each day where I'll answer some comments. I might have to start doing that. Um, but usually within like 1 or 2 days, I try to make sure that I respond to everybody. So it's coming. Hopefully I'll get to that tonight, if not tomorrow for sure. Um, Especially the longer, more complicated questions that I kind of have to really think about. Those ones definitely, I intentionally try to take a day or so to kind of let it process in my brain. But Steve, welcome to the chat. What does this mean? It sounds very strange to me. I'm going playing. I'm going playing. That does sound kind of strange, but it also kind of sounds like it works. Can you give me a context or like a source for that? because I know that structure can work, but it's a very special structure. And for my mind to grab onto that, it would help if I had something else around it, some sort of context. Oblivion, welcome to the chat. What to do if shadowing doesn't work anymore? I guess I'm doing something wrong. Also, I tried playing with pitch. Sometimes it would work, but it's so bad and random and usually just sounds high pitched. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, if you do that, if you raise or lower your pitch, that might be the only effect you get. Um, so that's the thing that confuses me. So oblivion is forlornness, I guess. Because yeah, so having two accounts throws me off. But we can talk about that since he recently became a Patreon member. We can maybe drill down into to what's going on there um, and figure it out. I do know I learned relatively recently that like Luca Lampariello, I may have talked about this before, I don't remember, but he's one of the bigger online polyglots from Italy. Very good accent. He speaks Spanish apparently like flawlessly. Like he doesn't really have an accent. His American English is just about flawless. And he says he doesn't shadow. And by that I mean I think he's thinking of shadowing and like sitting down and doing like a specific structure like Professor Argelis recommends. I'm sure obviously to get the pronunciation he does some sort of mimicking, which is essentially what shadowing is at the core. So I don't know all the details of what he does for his actual practice. But I personally think shadowing is like the single most powerful thing, but it also can take a lot of time and energy depending on how you do it. So there might be some other ways that you can look at, and we can sort of explore that, see what you've done. And maybe I can give you some tips on like maybe you are doing something wrong, maybe not. I would assume not, and we can kind of figure out what's going on there. So yeah, I do need to make like a formal lesson on like shadowing. I tried to do a little bit here and there to kind of tell you guys about that, but there's so many little details and ways that you can do it and stuff. I've always had trouble trying to piece together like just like an easy, comprehensive guide of like step by step. This is how you shadow, because there's not necessarily one right way to do it. So I'm going to put that together at some point, but. Um, Dave, in the Canadian raising, I want to say raising affects the O in house and I diphthongs about. Wouldn't it be a boot? Because BOAT I would read it as boat, not boot. Or it's most extreme, about. About. What's that about? Yeah, I can kind of imagine that. Interesting. Okay, so that's why they say about that way. I wasn't familiar with it with the I diphthong. So then how would that sound? Because I know they say a lot, but that's like, I guess that, yeah, so that's not I, it's a. I don't know. Something I haven't noticed in from Canadian speakers, even though I've heard quite a lot of them. So I don't know. Um, with the O change, yes, but with the or the ow change, but the I change, no, I haven't noticed that. Anyway, I have some vocabulary related questions. You know that thing that carries away rainwater that's attached to a roof? Yes, I do know that. What is that called in American English? That is called a gutter. Yes. So it's the thing where like you have the roof, and then there's this little thingy that is sort of like this, and you attach it to the side of the roof. The rain falls onto that, and then it goes, and there's like a drain that it all leads to, so that the water will, instead of falling off the house, it'll just all drain down in one spot. That's called a gutter. I think it has another term too, and there might be regional things that we call that, but what I've always called it and what I always have mostly heard it called is gutter, or you can say rain gutter specifically if you want. Good. Now you said you have some vocab-related questions, so I assume there's more coming. Um, yeah, I understand. My comments are generally long too, so don't worry about it. Okay, no problem. Good. A drain or something. Drain. It's a good guess, Oblivion, for the rain gutter. Um, the part that comes down, so not the part that attaches on the roof, but that comes down for the water to empty. You could call that a drain. Um, I think we actually call that the spout. Um, but I mean, it could be referred to as a drain. It is technically draining the water from, or whatever. It makes sense to me, but gutter, yeah. Rider sounds more like a schwa into a short I, so rather than the I diphthong. So if I were to try to do that, that would be rider, 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 rider. Like that, not only is that very uncomfortable for me to do, but it doesn't even sound like English to me. Like kind of sounds like English or American English at least, but no, it's a writer, writer. It's I. Yeah. Um, like I can imagine maybe somebody from the South, like if they have a Southern accent and they say it that way, that would kind of make sense. Like, oh yeah, he's a writer. He's a writer. Like that kind of makes sense to me. I can hear it, but for standard American pronunciation, no, not at all. I would be shocked if I heard anybody ever say it that way. Um, and I probably wouldn't understand what they're saying. I know the Canadian word for it, but I'm positive it's not the American one. Oh yeah. I kind of stopped shadowing for now, just waiting for the call. Yeah, no problem. That's fine. I feel like I'd just take a break or do something else since it's just frustrating. Yeah, it's probably the best idea. Don't worry too much about it right now. I believe the raised I is present in West Coast speech as well. Sometimes Canadian accent and American overlap. I don't know. I have another word on my mind. Hold on. Okay. I heard it in the song. I'm back outside. I'm going playing. Okay. Yeah. So now that we're back here, Steve, again, my brain was kind of processing that for a second. So this is the example that I like to use because this is actually a pretty common phrase. I'm going running. Um, so if now you can say I'm going for a run, right? We'll come back to playing. It's the same. It's working the same way, but running is easier to explain. Um, so you can say I'm going for a run. I'm going on a run. Both of those work. There's no problem there. And that means like not like you're just gonna start running, but you're gonna leave the house. You're gonna the purpose of your leaving is to run, and then you're gonna return right for some exercise. So for a run, on a run, or you say I'm gonna go run. You could say that as well. Um, there's lots of variation that you could use there, or you could say I'm going running. Now the reason why this works is because running in this case, or playing in the example that you gave, these are nouns, right? Remember the ing form can turn the verb into a noun, and so it still seems kind of weird because we wouldn't say I'm going store, right? We would say I'm going to the store, but it's an action being turned into a verb, and so we're not going to the verb, right? I mean, we have that structure where we can use to point to the verb, but um, in this particular structure, we don't. It's not necessary. It's just we don't use to here, um, and so I'm going where on a run. If it's playing, I'm going out to play. Right, I'm going somewhere to play. It's a really weird structure, um, and I'm actually not sure why it exists, but it does exist. It kind of breaks a lot of the basics that you know with like to do, doing, um, and how the ing is generally used. But And I don't know if it's an American thing or if it's just like if British people also use it. But yeah. So your original question was, what does it mean? So if you say I'm going plane, it just means I'm leaving the house, right? So the going means I'm leaving, and then in order to, that's going to be implied here, even though we're not using to. But what is the purpose of you leaving? You're going to be doing that particular action. So it's just a weird structure. Um, and I think there's some verbs that are very, very commonly used with that structure, like running, where playing, I kind of was like, okay, maybe a little more context here, or let me kind of think about it because it didn't quite jump out at me. Like, yeah, that makes sense, but it didn't quite feel wrong. It's like, it sounds strange, but it doesn't feel wrong. And so I wasn't completely sure. So I had to have some time there. But yeah, going running is a very, very common one. Now, would you say like I'm going working? No, we don't. We just say I'm going to work. Why? Because we just don't say I'm going working. So it's I would look at it as a special structure that tends to be used just with like certain verbs. We don't use it with all verbs. And you can just anytime you hear one of those and you know that it's this structure, it's not like something else that weird that's going on. Just memorize it. You know, they're going to be um, special cases that you can memorize. So yeah, that's what I would do. Um, okay. What else do we have? I got something plane. Okay, so I is definitely not raised, at least for me. The ow raising doesn't happen in America, but I does. I, I. See, I don't even know about this I raising. I, I. I might assume, based on what my tongue does and based on what I've heard and what sounds okay in American English, that this I raising would maybe be where we lift the middle of the tongue a bit or something like that. Because I can do I and I can actually have the placement be a bit farther forward, like with the where my tongue is going, not the placement in terms of vocal placement. I don't when I use placement, I usually mean like the articulation, like where my tongue is. Um, so I can have it be like farther forward, like I, and that sounds sort of very clear and enunciated to me. Or if I'm a little bit lazy, then it can actually be farther back, not too far, like I. That's like way too much. Um, sounds kind of maybe British in a way or Australian. Um, but if I kind of go a bit towards ah and then go up to I, but not quite into ah, like that feels like a lazier way to do it. And anything in there, if I hear any American go from I to I wouldn't really notice anything strange there. It's a range. It's the range of the sound of the diphthong. Most sounds have ranges, so um, if that's what the I raising is, then I would assume that's what we're talking about. If not, then feel free to clarify. um, but anyway, Gabriel, hello. Welcome to the chat. Long time no see. I think you mentioned that you have like studies and stuff that you were doing, so I hope all that went well. We're now in July, so I assume you're on vacation or something. I don't know how the school system works around the world. There's different people do different things, but um, that's fine. I do raise it. It's actually difficult to do a clear I in right or light because the end voice consonants naturally make it sound more clipped, shorter in duration. Yes, which is an illusion, I will add, as I've said before. Um, it doesn't actually make them shorter. It's more subtle than you think. I guys have fun. I'm a sign up. All right, bye, Oblivion, if you're still here. Come back soon. Is there a difference between dinner and supper? Whether both used interchangeably? The meaning of them in my experience, is exactly the same. Um, but I would say the commonality of these words, like how commonly used they are, is it depends on where you're from. It's kind of like how I say soda, but some people say pop. It's more of a regional thing. They mean the same thing, but I would never call soda pop, right? Like it's weird. Um, so supper, my grandma uses the word supper. She also uses dinner, but she uses supper, and she comes from New York. I know in the South they also commonly use supper. I don't know if it's through the whole South, but I've heard it a lot from Southern speakers. But I say dinner. I never say supper, like ever. It's not a word I use. So maybe it's a West Coast thing, maybe it's a California thing. I don't know. But I think if I had to guess, I think that most Americans, or at least half of Americans, probably say dinner, regardless of where they're from. And to me, supper, maybe it's because my grandma uses it. To me, supper, it seems sort of like a word that is kind of fading a bit, at least like from some speech, some from some speakers. And we still recognize it, but it's just like it sounds to me. It sounds like a dated word. Like like we don't say golly gee anymore. Like nobody really says that. That's you know we say like wow or oh my god or something like that. Um, so supper kind of sounds like that. It's like I that's why I don't use it. Um, if some artist made a song and they have the merger and rhyme two words which wouldn't rhyme for someone who doesn't have the merger, wouldn't that sound strange for the person who doesn't have the merger? Good question. Let's see. So some artist made a song and they have the merger. So like for example, if I were to make a song, if I were an artist and I made a song, I have the merger and I rhyme cotton cot. Right. Let's just go with the name of the merger. So I rhyme cotton cot. Um, so someone who doesn't have the merger, those wouldn't rhyme. That would be cot and caught or something like that. So would that sound strange for the person who doesn't have the merger? Perhaps. So music is a little bit different because, especially like if we're putting um, the rhymed syllables like on the beat or where they're going to kind of maybe stand out more, especially in some forms like rap where maybe that word kind of really stands out and stuff. It depends on the type of music. Um, so music is a little bit special where it might be highlighted a little bit more just because of how the music is working. Um, but in speech, generally, I mean, I guess I can't answer for sure because I have the merger, so I'm going the other way. Um, I don't really think so because number one, the difference between ah and ah is actually so small. And what we're doing is we're taking ah, we're moving it back. We're using the same IPA symbol. So they're basically taking the sound, moving it back. The lips disappear because we don't do the aw, right? And we just drop the lips completely. But we're moving this back to the backness of where this sound was, the aw. And instead of the lips disappear and it kind of is like it just comes down. So we go like that, take away the lips, and now it sort of sounds like it's sort of in between the two. And so somebody who doesn't have the merger, or sorry, yeah, who doesn't have the merger, and if they're intentionally listening to the pronunciation, then they'll probably pick it out. But in the flow of speech, especially like really fast speech, um, I very, very much doubt that, if you're just communicating with somebody, they wouldn't even notice, or if they do notice, it's going to um, be something very, very minor that it doesn't sound like an accent necessarily. And I was thinking about this the other day. Obviously, there are some accents in American English. American English itself, is like compared to British English as an accent, but within American English, I mean, we have like the Southern accent. There's like the Boston, New York accent. There's this and that. But for most speakers around the country, like I talked about in my lesson about how there's not one neutral pronunciation. Um, Most American speakers don't have what I would call an accent. even though, say, the way I speak and the way somebody from the middle of the country speaks, the exact sounds that we use might be a little bit different, but we don't generally tend to notice because number one, the difference is so small. Um, and number two, again, in the flow of actual speech, we're not trying to hear their pronunciation, we're just communicating. It would largely go unnoticed. Sometimes it might stand out. We might kind of notice here and there, maybe in some words, but for the most part, we wouldn't even really notice going either way. Um, and then people who maybe they teach languages, they're going to be a little more perceptive for that, or people who maybe have some language experience from when they were younger, this or that, like maybe they were exposed to you know different dialects and this and that. Maybe they might more easily kind of recognize, but I think for the average speaker, no. um, and even if it is noticed, again, like, say I can listen to somebody from the Midwest, and if I'm listening very closely, like actually there's a YouTuber I follow who's from the North Midland, from the Chicago area. And now that I'm aware of a lot of these things, I hear that he says ah, and he says some words a little bit weird, in my perspective, or from my position of how I speak. But like 99% of what he says doesn't stand out to me at all, even if he reuses those same, like the ah sound, like in the flow of his speech, it doesn't always stand out to me, even though I can hear it now because it's not important. It's such a small difference. Um, and so I wouldn't say that he has an accent, right? Because it's most Americans speak closely enough to each other that I don't think it's fair to distinguish them as separate accents, even though the specific little sounds might be tiny, a little bit different here and there. Um, if you want to go into linguistics and say, okay, yes, these are the exact tiny little differences that we can, measure and note and this and that, then technically those differences do exist, but do they actually matter and do people really notice them? And is it fair to say that they're separate accents within American English? For the most part, I don't think so. Now, if we talk about the Southern accent, yeah, now we have things that are quite a bit different throughout the general speech that we notice it as like, oh yeah, you're from the South, very clearly from the South, or some people from the North, like Minnesota, right, or North Dakota, right. A lot of what they say will sound pretty neutral, but then they have certain vowel changes like that, like Dakota or Minnesota or things like that, where it really stands out and we're like, yeah, you're from the North. um, and that deals with the northern cities vowel shift and weird things that happen. But anyway, yeah. Lily, Tilly, Lily, Tilly. Sometimes I call you Lily, I guess. I don't know, Tilly. Right and like have that. Oh, right and like have that raising. So right, instead of right, like instead of like. Hmm. This raising only happens before unvoiced consonants. Interesting. Let's see. Like, 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 like. Right, 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 right. I, ite, 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 ite. And you're saying it's more like a schwa going into like an e type sound. Hmm. I would say that this is completely, how do I want to describe this? Uh, Completely unimportant and something that you should ignore. Um, because I can very easily say like and right. Like I'm not saying right, right. I can say it that way. I can say right, where it's kind of more like a lazier way to do it, I guess. Instead of right, where maybe I might more clearly enunciate it. So I would include that as part of the range of the I. And you say it only happens before unvoiced consonants. So within that context, that now becomes part of the range where otherwise it wouldn't be. and it's really such a small little thing. I really would not worry about that at all. See, it's little specific details like that that I think are quite pointless. If you're a linguist, oh yeah, Lily is a different person. That's right. So Tilly and Lily. So I can't call Tilly Lily. That's right. So we have Tilly and Lily. Okay. Anyway, what was it? Yeah, if you're a linguist and you're interested, or if even if you're not a linguist, but you like really like phonetics and the little tiny technical details and all that stuff, then that's perfectly fine. As an academic thing, like, oh yeah, this exists. Like this is a thing that happens. Um, and you find that interesting, great. Like I'm not saying ignore it for that. Like if it's something you're interested in and you're like, yeah, that's really cool, or oh, that I noticed that's interesting, or whatever, then that's fine. But in terms of your actual speech and your perception of speech, little tiny details like that, I think are pretty much a waste of time. They're not really going to help you much. And if you happen to notice things like that, it's like, okay, yeah, and because like if you then try to go and you like intentionally, because like say like and right are stressed, right? So if you try to do this like schwa thing and then go into like you have it as a y, I guess it's supposed to be like e sort of a or e. Um, then if I were to try to say that in a stressed way, I would say like, like, right, right. Now I feel like I'm speaking with a British accent, like maybe a Cockney accent or an Australian accent. Like the life of the wife was ended by the knife, right? That's got that from Family Guy. But if I'm trying to have that sort of British type sound, like it's not like proper British necessarily, but I would try to do it that way. I would say oi, oi, with like an sound, oi. Um, so to me, like if you see that and you're like, oh yeah, there's this schwa and then there's this, and then you might try to pronounce it that way. Now you're just going to sound British, you know. Um, so I would be very careful with things like that. Academically, no problem. You can learn stuff like that if you want, but in terms of your own pronunciation, little details like that, I would completely ignore. Um, so yeah. The one exception, like one of the smaller details that I still do think you can completely ignore, but that is a little bit useful to talk about only because so many teachers talk about it and it's a little easier to notice, I think, for a lot of learners is the like the raising of before N and M. Um, and my perspective on that, that's a whole other topic. But yeah, some small details are useful. Things like this, I would say, are completely useless for your accent and your listening. Lily, what do you think about uptalk? I've heard some people saying that it sounds annoying. Uptalk. Uptalk is a noun. What is uptalk? Sounds familiar. Uptalk. A manner of speaking which declaratives. Ah, okay, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, I call that. Let's see how. Yeah, I call that Valley Girl speech. A lot of people refer to that as Valley Girl speech because that's how a lot of Valley girls from the Silicon Valley, teenagers from the Silicon Valley, at least historically, I don't know if they still do it, but that's how they speak. So like everything that they say kind of just like goes up like this, and that's just the way that they speak, and it's just very natural. And apparently, some people, I guess from New Mexico, kind of speak that way too. Um, and some people throughout parts of California, usually women are teenage girls most commonly. So what do I think about it? I think that it does sound annoying. Um, it breaks the standard intonation pattern that Americans expect to hear, because most of us don't speak with that sort of sing-songy up talk thing. And it if you go up like that, it kind of sounds like there's always more. Like and it breaks the flow, it breaks the rhythm, but some people speak that way. So most people will think that it sounds annoying, myself included. I think it sounds pretty annoying. In fact, there's a YouTuber, a vegan YouTuber that I follow, and she kind of has that. It's not super super bad, but I noticed it in her speech. um, and it makes it hard harder to focus on what she's saying because I just keep noticing that up and up and up. And I end up focusing on that instead of what she's saying. And I have to rewind the video to see what she was saying because my mind got focused on the up talk part. So I definitely would not recommend it for an English learner. Gabriel, if I stay away from the channel, it's not is it's because I'm frustrated with the English language and I'm taking a break. Well, that's okay. Sorry to hear that. English can be frustrating, for sure. Um, but taking a break is always good. You don't want to take too long of a break because it's very easy to let a week break turn into a month break, turn into a year break. You don't want to do that. But yeah, taking a break is fine, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. It's okay, just don't take too long. That would be my warning. Specifically, why are you frustrated? Because I can maybe point some things out or help you with that. If you would like to elaborate on why you're frustrated. David, please settle this for me. Okay. For the flying insect that glows in the dark. I like how we're like, this is like a game. It's like, describe it and then find the word, like find the word that we use for that or the name we use for that. For the flying insect that glows in the dark, do you say lightning bugs or fireflies? I've heard them called lightning bugs. I don't know if I've heard Americans call them lightning bugs. Because even in the Midwest, I'm pretty sure they call them fireflies. And I call them fireflies. Yes. Which sadly we don't have here, at least in my area. But when we lived in Missouri for 2 years, I was from about 10 to 12. And every summer there would be a bunch of fireflies. And it was pretty awesome, even though I was afraid of them because I used to be afraid of all insects except for ants and flies, which deals with some early childhood trauma, which we don't have to go into here. But they're still cool. Yeah. I don't have the merger, and I'm pretty sure the merged rhyme would sound normal to me because the merger is very popular. Yeah, that's also a good point. Very nice. Yeah, a lot of people, and as I mentioned before, it's actually moving eastward across the country. So it's going to be something that people are used to hearing anyway, and it may not even stand out to them as like something different. And because if I hear somebody with the merger say caught, I associate it with the ah vowel because of the context. Yeah, there you go. Hmm. And if they said caught, which I say the same, I would hear it as an a vowel because of the context. Yes. So sleep on the cot. Sleep on the cot. Or what if they say, I got caught sleeping on the cot. I got caught sleeping on the cot. I guess you still know which is which. So it's fine. But I got caught sleeping on the cot. Yeah. Pretty sure it goes that way. So yeah, and that's the other thing. I mean, the context is important, depending on how you learned before, and your brain will generally compensate as well. That's another factor here. Like for people with the merger, we don't even usually hear, like we don't consciously notice the unmerged version because our brain just compensates, and we just hear it as ah. And that's how my brain was for the longest time until the last say 6 or 7 months or so when I actually started to become much more aware of it, and now I can actually usually hear the difference. Um, what do you call the dry matter that collects in the corners of the eyes while someone is asleep? What do you call the dry matter? Oh, well, it's really funny. Um, we call that sleep. Yes, it's called sleep. Um, so we say you have sleep in your eyes, which I think is really cool. It's a really cool thing to call it because like you get it while you're sleeping, and then it's like residue of sleep, as if sleep were like a noun, a thing, right? So we call it sleep. Yeah, you have sleep in your eyes. Um, What caught my eye first with your book, The Logic of English Prepositions, is that you dedicate it for your grandparents. Found that very touching. Can you, if you are comfortable, talk a bit about it? Well, I mean, it was the first book that I published, and they've supported me a lot and everything. So, yeah, I figured, the very first book that I publish, um, I would dedicate to them. And then I forget after that, I have like another dedication in one of my other books and another dedication in one of my other books. So that was kind of like the first stop for me. Like, okay, this is my first published book. If I'm going to thank somebody, who am I going to thank? And so I put it to them. So, yeah. Um, I have an American accent, actually. I'm just curious and double checking stuff. I find these things fascinating. Huh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah. So, I mean, if you have an interest, just because you're interested in them, that's fantastic. Me personally, I don't like. I like sounds, and I like especially like in foreign languages. Like one of the reasons why I want to learn a particular language is because of how it sounds. Um, and if I don't like the way the language sounds, then it actually, even if otherwise I would want to learn it, it makes me not want to learn it. And so if the language sounds really cool to me, I'm like, oh, I want to be able to do that, and like sound like a native, like fool a native, like that would be cool. Um, and so from that aspect, like I really like playing with sounds and learning some of this stuff, but a lot of the really technical details and like the fine like splitting hairs and this and that, um, a lot of it is just too dry and boring and academic for me, and I'm not particularly interested. So that's another reason why I don't tend to emphasize those little details, because I don't think they're particularly important. I'm trying to teach, like the average English learner who's learning American English and give them sort of the easiest, least complicated way that they can just kind of, get the accent and sound neutral, sound natural, no problems. So that's my whole goal. And if I have to go into some technicalities, I do and I will. But yeah, I try to avoid that if possible. That's also why I don't use a lot of the technical terminology. Like I'll say the roof of the mouth instead of what is it, like the upper palate or something like that, because um, that creates a bigger barrier to entry. Like if you know that, or you're a linguist, then those technical terms are useful because it's like, okay, it's like the bones, right? Okay, you have all the terms for the bones, and a doctor or a scientist who knows that, they're going to know specifically what you're talking about, and that's useful for that. But for somebody who's just trying to learn, you know, what to do with their tongue, this special terminology can actually get in the way, I think. And so that's why I describe it like, okay, here's your teeth, here's the top of your mouth, the part that goes up, because then you can immediately know what's going on. Okay, I'm talking about this part of the mouth, and I say, okay, you put your tongue here, so okay, it has to be somewhere around here. If I say don't put it on the teeth, don't touch the teeth. If I say don't go back here, right, that would be the part that starts going up. Your tongue is too far back, right? So we don't say like duh, for example. Um, so I think that works a lot better, and apparently a lot of English learners agree with me because they say that they like the way that I teach. So, the curious soul, like about your relationship with them and some unforgettable memories you have with them. I feel like they've influenced you a lot in terms of your personality, it's amazing person, hardworking, um, person you are today. Well, yeah, I prefer not to go into that. um, I don't tend to. I mean, I'm generally kind of like an open book, but what I'll say here is I want to describe this in a way that doesn't seem, I guess, crude or unrefined. I don't. Okay, I'll say this. I'll give you this much. My brain has some problems processing emotion, and so I don't tend to like to talk about, especially not publicly on a live stream, talk about things that we would describe as like touchy feely or emotional. Um, so I'm going to pass on that. But I will also say I actually don't view myself as a hardworking person. I think that I'm way too lazy, even though right now I'm technically working with like four jobs, if you count YouTube. Um, so yeah, I also don't consider myself particularly ambitious, and yet people have called me very ambitious. So I don't know the meaning of some words apparently. So yeah, but I'll pass on that. Um, but yeah, we'll move on. Lily, do you think? Wait, do you? Oh, I said, do you think? I put you there even though it wasn't there because that's a common chunk, right? So it's like do and think. There has to be a you there. Do think. This also helps when you put the quotes, right? Because then I would have, my brain would have read it right because it would have hit the quote and said, oh, okay, that's a word. Do think and thank sound the same in some American accents? I think so. I think so. Uh, well, instead of accents, I would say dialects or regional variations. Possibly, if I try to say, so the way that I say thank, right? First of all, so it's not thank with a, which is how some people say it, and that's perfectly fine. You can say it that way. I say thank with the a diphthong, thank. Um, Now, if you were to try to say think as thank with if you pronounce it with the fourth vowel then I would say no. Like I don't think there's any Americans that would ever do that. Um, but if we try to say think with that a diphthong, like thank the way I say think, and I say like I think so, it can sound a bit weird. If the speech is pretty fast, I have noticed sometimes speakers say that. Um, it's kind of a weird thing. I don't think it's necessarily a regional thing. I just think it's maybe like a really lazy or odd way to say the word that some people use sometimes. Um, because sometimes we try to speak funny, like maybe like to sound stupid, like, oh, I think so. I think so, you know. Um, and if we try to do that, like, yeah, like we might try to change it like that, even though it's not the way we would normally say it. So generally, the easy answer, I would say, definitely don't say these the same. um, can it happen? Yes. Is it a regional thing? Maybe. Um, but I would say these are just generally two separate words with two separate pronunciations. Um, for definitely for most, like 99% of speakers. Um, what is a generic term to refer to people that work in supermarkets, clothing stores, or restaurants? The ones that receive customers' orders and then handle money change when the customers pay. Okay, so you mean the ones who work? I'm not looking for anything fancy like sales assistant. I want the most casual, urban way to call them. Yeah, sales assistant sounds like you're trying to we would say put lipstick on a pig. Sales assistant sounds like you're trying to put lipstick on a pig, which means you're trying to take something that which I mean the normal casual way isn't like dirty or gross or anything, but it just sounds like an unnecessary way, like you're trying to artificially make it sound nicer than it is. Um, so yeah, I get where you're coming from there. So are you specifically referring because you say like that receive the customer's orders and then handle the money and change? Are you specifically talking about the ones that are at the cash register, or are you just talking about like because that's what I would assume receive orders and then handle the money and change. So it has to be at the cash register. Um, in which case, we have two terms. One I think is it also might be a regional thing in terms of the commonality. One would be more common for me and how I usually hear it, but you can call them the clerk. And actually, we will use clerk if it's like a small store. It's much more likely to say clerk instead. You can use clerk in general, it doesn't matter the size, but to me, I think of a clerk as somebody who is like at the cash register or kind of running the store for like a small store, like maybe a liquor store, or if you're out in the country and you go into this little store or whatever shop. Clerk would be a good term, but most of the time, especially in like a supermarket or something that's a bigger place, I would say cashier, right? Cash register, cashier, the person who runs the cash register. So yeah. Um, so I would say that would be the answer there, although clerk is possible. What etymology do you normally use? I'm not sure what you mean. Because etymology is you mean like the source, like when I look up etymology? Because etymology is just the history of words. Um, so we can go and kind of see like where they came from and how they changed over time, maybe. So I don't use etymology. Like it's kind of a weird question that doesn't make sense. But if you're referring to where do I get my information for etymology, that would be etymonline.com. I think that's what it's called. It's a really good resource. Yeah, etymonline.com. Especially if you're interested in taking an approach of trying to build up a feeling for words. Because I used this site a lot when I was writing the logic of preposition books. Because in order to find the logic, especially for some of them, like down, like if I didn't have this resource, I would not have found the logic for down. Like and one of the core ideas behind down, which is also one of the core ideas behind the entire English language, um, I found because of Edom Online. Yeah, I want to know if you use an app or a website. Yeah, that's what I use. Sometimes I might not be able to find what I'm looking for there. Um, and so I might just like also do like a general search online and see if I can find anything and try to make sure that the source is credible. But most of my information, that's my go-to source if I want to look up etymology, Edom Online. Um, Good question. And of course, that's for English specifically. I don't know if I don't think it's just American English. It should just be English in general. I'm not completely sure about that, but for other languages, you'd have to find something else because that's for English. Um, but okay, and then Tilly, I feel like when I say with that, I'm way more likely to use the dental D for some reason. Um, Good point. Good point. There is a reason for that. There's actually two possible reasons for that that are kind of the same thing. It just depends on how you look at it. Um, so that by itself, right, without anything before it, pretty much any time a word starts with a th, especially if it's a common function word like that or this, uh, it will never sound strange or out of place to use the dental D. Like it's perfectly fine. But as I mentioned before, so I'm putting the pieces here together first. A th at the end, whether voiced or voiceless, by itself, like if there's nothing after it, like um, what did you draw that painting with, right? We're probably going to do an actual th. Um, it's much more likely in that particular case, but as soon as there's something after it, then it can kind of usually go back to the dental. So it's a little bit of a special case there, but generally it doesn't really matter. Now, because we have th and th, yes, one is voiceless, one is voiced, but because they're both th sounds, this particular combination with and that, you can say with that, and you're actually doing more of like a stop t for with because it's the voiceless th, and then pushing out that sort of dental d on the voice th with that. Right. So what are you going to do with that? With that, very common, no problem. We will do that a lot of the time. In fact, that's probably the most common way to say that combination. Now, let's say if it weren't with, does it also work if I say path that? Like that is the path that I took. That's the path that I took. Path that I took. It sounds okay, but eh, yeah. So I mentioned that because I think with the word with, right? The word with is number one, it's a function word. So it's not stressed, it's one syllable, it's just a common grammar word. And it is very, very common. And then with and that also probably go together pretty frequently. And so just like the preposition to is really, really special because it's super common and some strange things can happen with that T, like Goda, it turns into a flap D, when wouldn't normally do that in that position. I think with also has a little bit of extra flexibility that maybe, just it's not necessarily because it's the TH there, where it still sounds perfectly fine. So with that, no problem. Path that, that's the path that I followed. Kind of, it's okay, but it sounds a little bit off. We're probably gonna say path that. Now you can say path that. So you do that first voiceless th and then just close it into that, and that's perfectly fine. So this is again where like some little details can be useful, but it's tricky because of that th at the end. It doesn't always become a dental D. That's why it's a special little piece. But yeah, unfortunately, in my quest to make things easier and simpler for you guys, some unforeseen and unfortunate minor complications can arise with some of those details. Um, so, yeah. Right. We all know that English is complicated and the pronunciation is crazy. So I'm just going to chalk it up to that. David, you mentioned a liquor store. Yeah. Would that term encompass a store that specializes in selling wine as well, or there's a unique term for that? Yeah, I mean, liquor store is liquor store. So obviously, like liquor is liquor, right? So we think like hard liquor, like bourbon or whiskey or whatever. But when we say liquor store, it's a place that sells alcohol, beer, wine, hard liquor. It doesn't matter. And they usually, well, actually, I would say they always. They also will sell, sodas and other drinks. They sell chips, usually candy. Um, they might sell a couple of regular store items, like a bottle of ketchup, but it's going to be like twice the price. um, so they're convenience stores basically. Um, but a convenience store like 7-Eleven, it tends to be maybe be a little bit bigger. They have more of a variety. And they also sell liquor. Where a liquor store, it kind of is it's usually smaller. It's kind of cramped inside. There's not as much space, but they will also sell more than just alcohol. But yeah, it's not limited to a particular type of alcohol like liquor. We just call it a liquor store. Yeah. So think of it like a small convenience store, basically. Lily, is there a word to describe when we're at home and we're not wearing the clothes that we would wear to go out? Is there a word to describe when we're at home and we're not wearing the clothes that we would wear to go out? So, like to describe, I don't think we have a word to describe not wearing clothes, unless naked. I mean, if you're not wearing anything. Do you mean like a word to describe the clothes that you wear when you're at home and not going out? Because otherwise, that seems kind of weird to me. When we're at home and we're not wearing the clothes that we would wear to go out. Because we have terms for that type of clothing that you might wear. I'm going to assume that's what you mean, and I'll just answer that. If not, that you can clarify. But I would say now for kids, we have like school clothes, right? And so like anything that's not school clothes, well, I mean not anything, but generally like there's school clothes and there's non-school clothes. So we don't necessarily call it like something specific. Um, we just say like, okay, when you get home, change out of your school clothes, when you get home from school. So you put on, other clothes because those are supposed to be nice and, kept really, really neat and used for the next day and everything. But for adults or for people who like aren't going to school, I mean, I guess you can call it like loungewear, which would be like really comfortable, relaxed clothes. Loungewear that you lounge in, which is like you just really relax, lay around. Um, but see, like we have words for like specific types of clothing, but I don't think we have a word to like completely cover what you're asking. It would just be like non-school clothes or non-work clothes. You can maybe say casual clothes, but I mean that might cover everything, but that doesn't really mean anything. It just means non-work, non-school, right? So, as I said, we have loungewear, which it could include pajamas or sweatpants or which pajamas are actually sleepwear technically, but you could lounge in them, be lazy, right? Um, and then I mean we have different kinds of shirts, t-shirts and whatever. So like I mean this is nothing special. I can wear this around the house. So I don't know. It's kind of funny because the English language probably we probably got this from French. Um, but the English language has like a label for everything, like everything. And we have so many words, especially adjectives, that are like synonyms, but there's like a shade of meaning difference or like how they feel. Like they basically mean the same thing, but like this feels kind of this way, this feels kind of that way. And so we can very accurately describe exactly what we're talking about. Um, but then if with it seems like with what you're asking, it's almost like there's a hole there because like we have all these terms for all these things, but then is there a common word? Maybe there is, and I'm just not thinking of it because we wouldn't say house clothes like that. That sounds weird. Um, for kids, you can say maybe play clothes. That would work. School clothes and play clothes. But for adults, I mean, I don't know. Nothing's coming to mind. Um, Sedent is messaging me on Skype for some reason. Um, all right. So I'll get back to that later. Okay, so where were we? Gabriel, yeah. So talking about drinks. The idiom "top shelf" only works for drinks or other things as well. I've only seen it in regards to fancy drinks. Yeah, we use top shelf a lot. It probably comes from the context of drinks. But yeah, we could say. I mean, we don't apply it to everything necessarily. I mean, so like, okay, headphones. So I don't have like the best, fanciest headphones, and these are really old. I've had these for like several years, and they still work really well. But like, say these were, Beats by Dre or something. Like I could say, oh yeah, these are really top shelf headphones. That's fine. I think we do much more commonly use it in the context of fancy drinks, but we will also use it for really anything that's really fancy and typically expensive. Um, is David from America or outside? I find both his English and his questions to be very refined. Yeah, I know what you mean by that. To be very eloquent, to be very um, yeah, I know. I know the problem you're running into there because you don't want it to sound like fancy and like formal, but um, use it maybe very, very native, very natural, perhaps, in the sense that both are helping me improve my English. Yeah, David definitely has that. David's also a Patreon, originally a Patreon supporter, and we've had some messages back and forth, and I can definitely tell that, yeah, the language is at least in writing, language is pretty um, top notch, not top shelf, top notch. It's a different expression. Um, so kind of you to say thank you, and hey, your writing is great as well. Glad you found it helpful to some degree. Yeah, also the curious soul, your writing is generally also quite well as well. Quite well as well. Quite well, quite good. I'm having a problem speaking, guys. um, but yeah, and I do notice some little things here and there, which I mean, I gave you a correction the other day as well, so I try to catch those. But yeah, so you're both quite good. I'm not from America, but a lot of essay writing did help me a lot. Yeah. um, okay. Is there a short word like takeout that refers to the opposite concept? Say you're in a fast food place and the person taking your order wants to know where you want to consume the food. Dine in. Dine in. Yeah, we won't always use that, but that would be the opposite. Right, which makes sense. Take out, dine in. So you either eat there or you take it away. You take it somewhere. Um, but in actual real speech, usually, I mean, they might ask like take out or dine in, like that happens sometimes. But I think what I hear much more commonly is it for here or to go? Is it for here or to go? Or I mean, we can actually drop the is it. We'll just say like for here or to go. And then if they don't ask that and you want to just tell them, you want to specify, you can say it's to go, or you can say it's for here. Instead of saying like it's takeout or it's dine in, like we wouldn't say those words in that particular structure like that in this context. So yeah, for here or to go. Um, what do you suggest is a good place to start if I want to specifically improve my essay writing skills from your experience? Yeah, I don't focus a lot on writing, so writing is. I know you're asking David, not me, so I'll let David answer that because it'll probably be a much better answer. For me, it's really hard to teach writing. I don't think I've talked to anything about writing on this channel yet. I will at some point, probably. Definitely not my focus because you guys already get enough about writing and reading from traditional classes and other teachers. Like I'm not particularly interested in teaching that. Um, but for me, teaching writing is really, really, really difficult only because it's one of my very high level skills um, that is just, it's like they say that you don't want to learn from an expert. You want to learn from someone who's just a little bit ahead of you because that person still, the information is still fresh and they much more easily relate with the trouble that you're having, where an expert, they have so much experience and time that it just becomes automatic. It's just like a lot of the information is just part of their subconscious now, and it actually becomes difficult to teach. And a lot of experts have that problem. So when it comes to writing, it's very difficult for me to teach because I don't know how I write so well. It just comes out. It just happens. And in fact, like I do some editing, but I have never done like say for an essay for school at any level, college, whatever. I have never done a second draft. Never, never, ever, ever, ever. I've never done a second draft. I do one drafts. Well, yeah, one drafts as in like all of the assignments that I get, so I can use the S there. It's a weird use, but so yeah, I only ever do one draft for an essay, and then I turn it in. I'll go back, I'll read it, I'll make some minor little tweaks here and there, but I don't do any like, oh, this is my first version. Okay, now let me, see and how could I change this and make the structure better and do it. Like I don't do any of that. It comes out, I make little changes to some of the wording, and then I turn it in. And I always get, I think the lowest I ever got was like a B plus on an essay. Um, and that's doing it the night before, like when there's no time left and I'm just trying to BS the whole thing because I really don't care about it. Um, and it sounds like I'm bragging. I'm really not. That's one of my skills. So it's really hard for me to kind of break that down and teach it. With a pronunciation, I'm also quite good with pronunciation, but um, that is also interlingual. And I have a lot of experience from trying to do that in Spanish. It's not just like, oh, I'm trying to teach you the English. I also have lots of references from the process I went through in Spanish that made me much more aware of how English is working in my mouth. And so now through that process, I actually am much more aware of how things work. Where with writing, that's different. Oh yeah, slowly. So in Portuguese, we would say I don't know how to pronounce this since it's in Portuguese. I think maybe we would do an H for an R there. Desarrumado, desarrumado, something like that. I don't know. Maybe it would actually be an R. Um, but anyway, but I've never found a good translation to this word. Translation for this word. Um, one of the things about for, one of the specific meanings of it is like an exchange. I call it an exchange. And so if we're talking about a translation, right, the natural preposition is going to be for, um, because we're saying okay, this word in this language and this word in this language, we're going to exchange them, right? So how do they match? So it's translation. We're exchanging between the languages um, for this word. So I never know what to say to my friends when I want to say I can't have a phone call right now because I'm not recognizing that word for in terms of relation to Spanish. It might be a Spanish word I don't know, or it might just be a word that's different in Portuguese. Um, Tilly says untidy, so I'm just going to say that's probably it. um, some words don't always translate very well, especially depending on the context. I'm gonna check this really quick here. Portuguese. Um, I have limited experience with Portuguese and Portuguese resource, like Portuguese to English resources. But one thing that I would recommend if you aren't aware of it is Collins' English to Portuguese dictionary. That seems to be a pretty good resource. Um, that's English search. So it says here in British English it would be untidy. I mean, we use untidy too. Also, American English untidy. Um, yeah, untidy, messy. So messy is a possibility. So I can't have a phone call right now because I'm messy. That sounds weird. Um, and actually, if you say I'm untidy or I'm messy, like that sounds like, which maybe this is what you mean. I don't think it's the most natural way to say it, but that sounds like you yourself, like you need a shower. Maybe like your clothes are you know like stretched out or something, like you were in a fight or something. So like I mean you could say like my room is messy or untidy. My workspace is messy or untidy. Uh, so you might be having trouble translating it because messy or untidy don't really fit as far as I can think with what you're trying to say there. Um, you can also say you look like a mess. Okay, that works too. Yeah, yeah. Good phrase. Yeah. So we can use the idea of mess. I can't have a phone call right now because I look like a mess. Although the thing that confuses me though is because you're saying I can't have a phone call, which the person wouldn't see you, right? Like maybe if it's a Skype call or something, or if that's what you're sort of implying from the context, then that would make sense. But if they can't see you, it sounds kind of weird to mention that. But anyway, yes. So Tilly to the rescue. Good job. Okay. It's just a lot of things, but since I have to keep it super short due to YouTube's limit, I'd say keeping a journal helps with translating emotions into English. Then choosing a topic you're already familiar with and maybe passionate about is very helpful because you're not bogged down with having to do research, etc. Those are good advice. Um, no, Professor, I didn't mean it that way. Your inputs will also definitely help. I asked him because he's not a native, but still managed to climb up the formal writing skill ladder. Oh yeah, no, I mean that's fine. Um, I don't really have a whole lot to say about writing anyway, so um, yeah. I also used to write reviews to movies and anime series. Ah, nice. I watched, but in order to get better at those, I'd read other people's reviews first and then try to copy the structure and tone. Very nice, interesting. So yeah, that's a general That's a very good like just general skill learning thing is um, in this case we're adapting it to writing, right? And you're trying to write your own reviews of things to sort of like practice and stuff. So you say, okay, well, let me go and see how other people did it and sort of how that sounds, how they structured it. And that could be extremely useful because like you might be doing it like your own way based on your language and how it comes out more naturally to you. But then other languages, especially in writing, not in the spoken language, like we might structure things a little differently. We might, just do things differently. So, but even like for natives like myself, right? Like if I wanted to improve at that, I could, like they say, great writers are great readers, right? So you read a lot, you hear the tone and the structure of a lot of other authors, and that kind of helps to, I would say, inform or inform your own writing. Meaning, like it helps form and structure your own writing based on the influence. So, any skill between languages, not between languages, that's a very good approach. Yes. Um, what does it mean if someone calls you a hot mess? I'm actually not completely sure because I've always thought of that term a particular way, and then more recently I was like, no, that's not right. So, because the way that I heard it being used, I was like, that doesn't actually make sense. Um, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I never thought of like how I would formally define it. I kind of just like tried to get the vibes of it off the context because I'm lazy and we know that I'm generally out of the loop. Like I'm not the hippest person, who knows all the slang. This is a pretty common thing, but I never really heard it growing up much. I don't know if it's like post '90s or what. Um, but it would be defined formally as a person, thing, or situation in a state of pitiful disarray. So think of a breakup, right? This is easiest thing. I actually heard this in a country song recently, and I was like, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense from the context. That's probably what it means. But um, there's a breakup, and then the person is really sad and upset, and they're crying, and like they seem very pitiful. Like, oh, this person is having a really hard time. They're crying, they're suffering. Um, maybe they don't want to go out. They're depressed. All this stuff. So especially if it's like really intense, right? Like they're really upset about it, not just like, oh, I kind of feel depressed, right? Um, that'd be like a hot mess. So, and it makes sense because the hot sort of makes it sound strong, and then the mess is like, well, it's like you're not orderly, you're not your normal self that's like composed, right? It's like your composure is all over the place. You're just a mess. So I'll try all that, Dave, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant to say. Thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no need to apologize, Lily. We're here to learn, right? So wherever you are now in English and uh, whatever attempt you make at communicating is good. It's perfectly fine. It is what it is. And if I don't understand or if you make a mistake or whatever, there's no reason to apologize for that. There's no reason to feel bad for that. See, I was actually describing this to a student the other day because he was telling me how like he doesn't like to make mistakes and this and that, which I totally get because I don't like to make mistakes. I don't think anybody really likes to make mistakes, but I like to try to avoid mistakes when I'm learning a language. But obviously, you can't, and so you kind of feel uncomfortable. It's like you don't want to make the mistakes, but you have to make the mistakes. And so the way I put it, there's two ways that I put this that I think sort of harmonize together to make a complete picture. One is failure is the soil of success. Soil meaning like ground that is has nutrients and that plants can grow out of, right? So failure is the soil of success. So success is the plant, failure is the soil. That's the only way you reach success, by failing a lot. It provides the nutrients for the success. If you keep going, right? If you give up, then you're just left with a bunch of soil that isn't going to grow anything. Um, but also, And I really like this way. Think of it like you're shooting an arrow, right? And there's a target. And you pull the bow back and you fire, and it misses the target. Okay. Now, most people, I mean, you might be, okay, well, I wanted to hit the target, right? But if you compare that to, say, like making a mistake in English, or not, like you try to communicate and the person doesn't understand and you kind of feel like really awkward and like, like why is my English better? You compare that to like, okay, I missed the target. If you think of it like missing the target, it doesn't seem so bad, right? It's like, okay, well, my arrow didn't go where I wanted it to go. Okay, so what are you going to do? Are you going to feel bad? No. Are you going to give up? Probably not. I mean, you're there to shoot arrows, right? Okay, so you missed. So you take another arrow and you try again, right? You make a little change. Okay, I tried to shoot it over there, it didn't go where I wanted it to go, so let me make a change. And so that's the whole process of learning is you try, and if it works, great, but commonly it won't work, especially when you're at a lower level. You try, it doesn't work. So you make a little change, you try again. If that doesn't work, maybe it gets closer, maybe it gets farther away. It's very scientific. It's exactly the way I teach pronunciation. This is all skill building. It's very, very plain, dry, step by step, scientific. Like it's boring actually. Whether you're learning a language, programming, learning how to draw, it's all the same basic process. You try, it doesn't work, you make a little adjustment, and then you try again. And you just repeat that process over and over and over again a million times until you're good. That's it. That's the whole process of skill acquisition. Um, and that creates the soil, right? And it also plants the seed, and then the success starts to grow out of that repeated effort. So that's all you're doing. So never feel embarrassed. I mean, if you feel embarrassed, you feel embarrassed, but there's no need to feel embarrassed. You don't have to apologize. You don't have to say anything like that. We know you're learning, and that's perfectly fine. Um, and that goes for everybody, of course, not just Lily. Pronunciation question. Finally, yeah, I know, right? How do you say the words? See, I always want to like hold off on it. I want to see the words first. I probably should just say them though. But how do you say the words deity and amphitheater? Um, and can you break them down into individual syllables? Yeah. So deity is deity. I think there's another way to pronounce it that other people use because I think I've heard it a different way. Deity. Anyway, but any other way, I mean, that definitely sounds like the best way to say it to me. Deity. B, B, well, I gotta get the stress in there too. Deity. Deity with a flat D. So we go D, small Y connector into I, and then into a flap D with the E sound again, deity. Now, remember that the way that I speak, and I think it's a Western American thing, not 100% of the time, but usually where something would be a schwa sound, we can actually change it into and it really doesn't matter. It's two ways to say the same thing. They both sound perfectly fine. And I'm never completely sure of because sometimes if you go to the dictionary, it'll say it's supposed to be and other times it'll say it's supposed to be and a lot of times when it says I would actually naturally pronounce it right? When it's unstressed, it's not actually like the upside down V true or the untrue schwa as I call it. But if it's actually like a schwa, then I always have to double check to see if I would say it would other people maybe say it with the schwa sound. So let me actually check that. That's like one of the few good uses of the dictionary pronunciation. Like for me, is I can actually see since it's based on like sort of that Midwestern, Upper Midland type neutral accent instead of my neutral accent. Deity. And it says It does say Now, if I try to say it with a schwa, deity, deity, deity. Yeah, if I do it with a schwa, it also sounds fine. No problem. So it doesn't matter. You can say it with a schwa if you want. But deity, deity. Okay. Then for the next word, Amphitheater, amphitheater. So I would actually probably more commonly pronounce this amphitheater without instead of th, it's just a p. Um, which some people would probably say is wrong. I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. But if I were to more clearly enunciate the word, then I would get that ph sound. Amphitheater. It's just like diphthong, right? It's supposed to be diphthong. Um, but I say diphthong, which is a very common way to pronounce it. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it's sort of a very similar thing here. So you can say amphitheater or amphitheater. So amp. I'm going to do it my way. You can change the P for the F if you want, but I'm going to put it as a P. Amp. Yeah. Amphitheater. I think this is another case where you can do it or schwan. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to say amphitheater. Also, theater in itself has a couple different pronunciations, and there's not necessarily a correct answer there. So I might use one or more ways to say theater, but I think the way I most commonly say that would be theater instead of like theater sounds very, very fancy. Um, theater with a schwa sound there is an alternative way to say it. But I usually do it theater, which is very, very common as well. So amphitheater. I think there's secondary stress there. A weakness, secondary stress. Secondary stress. I'm right like 98% of the time there. It's taking a really long time. Theater. Flap D into and I'm going to get my primary stress in there. So it'd be something like this. No, wrong. I capitalized the PIH because I wasn't paying attention. Let me do it again. And or P, probably. Or P. Or fit or F. Could be an F sound also. Fear. Now we got it. That's so there you go. That took way too long. Way too long, but those are the answers. Mr. Machiavelli. Sorry, it took me a second. I am doing well. I hope you are also doing fine. I got a question. Please, is it always okay to pronounce the letter? Okay, as soon as I pronounce the letter, I have no idea how I'm supposed to pronounce that because the letter doesn't really mean it much for the pronunciation. But okay, after W as the cup vowel, so what I would call the schwa, the not true schwa, rather than the father vowel. So ah. Good question. So okay. So after so like okay, say if we had like water, that would be like the letter A after W, WA, and you want to know if you can pronounce it as instead of ah. No. Also remember, I think that this question is based on some I don't want to call it bad learning, but you were maybe taught either wrong or in a very poor way. Because like the letter A could be pronounced ah, a, ah, could be pronounced as a schwa. And it doesn't mean that you can just choose whatever you want when you see an A. You can't just choose whatever vowel you want. The word is pronounced how it's pronounced, and it's going to use whatever sound it uses. Sometimes there's more than one option. That's not because of the A, it's just because maybe there's more than one way, like data and data, two ways to say the same thing. It doesn't matter. Um, but the letter itself doesn't really tell us too much. Um, some spelling patterns can be useful and give you a good idea, but the letter A doesn't really mean anything for pronunciation. So, like for example, in the word water, which fits your question, it's ah. That's just how the word is pronounced. It's spelled W-A. It could be spelled like this because the letter O is also commonly pronounced ah, but we happen to spell it with an A for whatever historical reason. Um, so this is a big part of my channel, and my message to you guys is that it doesn't matter how things are spelled, right? Sometimes, again, the spelling patterns can be useful, and I try to give you some of that in the main lessons. But at the end of the day, you have to focus on your ears. So if you ask about a specific word that has an A after a W, and you say, like, can water be pronounced with a, and say water, that would be a good question. And the answer would be no. Maybe there's another word that has W and A that is normally pronounced ah, which it might not be. It could be pronounced something else, like maybe want. So want is pronounced ah, just like water. Can we say want? No. Maybe if you're speaking really quickly and you say like, I want to go, I want to go. Okay, there you can actually kind of reduce want to go, want to go, I want to go. That can sort of become a schwa sound, right? Now it's still stressed, so it would be the upside down V, the not true schwa, and as I say, they're basically the same sound, so that's how I teach it. But it does turn into that sound. If you're speaking really quickly, you can say want as want. Um, but that's a special case. Normally, the pronunciation of the word is supposed to be want. Water will never do that. Do you want some water? Want some water? What's water? I have no idea. In fact, water sounds like what with R contracted. What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, so we're going to interpret that completely different. So um, never focus, well, aside from some common spelling patterns that might be useful and can give you a good idea, um, really you have to focus on your ears, regardless of what the spelling pattern is, and regardless of if it gives you a good idea or not. You still always have to focus on your ears. Um, and yeah, that would be my main point. Focus on the ears, not the eyes. So I hope that answers your question, even though I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but that's the best answer I have for that. And let me know if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then we can talk more about it. But Gabriel, in the word meritocracy, can I change the RI to a schwa, to a sha? A little misspelling there. Yeah, the W and the A need to be switched. But yeah, probably a typo. Schwa is so in meritocracy. So if you try to change the R and the I, the ri, right, which is I vowel in it, second vowel sound, meri. If you try to replace both of those for the schwa, then it would be mea, mea, meritocracy. So no. um, can we change the I for a schwa? Instead of saying meri, can we say mera? Meritocracy. Yes, you can. In fact, let me see what the dictionary says, because maybe this is one of those words that's supposed to have the schwa, and I'm saying it with I. Okay, no, so yeah, it's supposed to have I according to the dictionary. So you can say meri or mera, and it does not matter. Because it's unstressed. I and when they're unstressed and we're speaking quickly, they sound almost exactly the same in the flow of speech. Um, And I is a common reduction sound in addition to the schwa. The schwa is the most common reduction sound, but I is also commonly used as a reduction sound. So um, you can do that if you keep the R. Good question. Um, now I was thinking, let's see. Yeah, that's with and so that doesn't apply here. Okay, you're so kind. Thank you for typing the words out. Yeah, no problem. Well, I mean, you said, can you break them down into the individual syllables? That's what I assumed. I mean, I guess I could just say them, but like, what's the point of that? Like, to me, that implies I should rate them. um, anyway, have you ever heard someone use the word bullion? Yes. It's not a particularly common word. I actually heard it the other day because I was watching a thing on gold. But yeah, bullion. I think some people say bullion, some people say see. Yeah, this is one. So the last syllable there, it could be it or just like a lot of what we're seeing here. That's why I said a lot of the time it doesn't really matter. So you can say bullion or bullion. That's fine. And then that L, like we saw actually at the start with like schooler or foolish. This is one where it's actually right. It's boolean, so it should be like boolean or boolean, and we can activate that L into the full L, light L sound. And that's one way to say it. So you can do a full L there, or you can do a half L, which is very, very common in American English. We'll just ignore the rule and say boolean or boolean. So there's actually like 4 pronunciations for that one word, but it's not a common word. We also use it, I think, for like stock, like vegetable stock. Where you have like, yeah, you have like a bouillon cube. So it's like a condensed, dried, prepackaged stock for soups, like vegetable stock, beef stock, whatever. We call that bouillon, also bouillon cubes. Um, but for was, what we can use the, I guess was and what we can use the cut vowel. Okay, so good question. I'm glad you asked this. In those words, there is no ah. There, it's not was and what. That's not how those words are pronounced. They're spelled with A's, but they are never pronounced that way. That's not how we say those words. In these two words, was and what, the sound is It's the sound like in the cup vowel, right? Um, so again, it could be a little misperception on your part. It could be with the way that you were taught. Or whatever, but for whatever reason, yes, this is why I emphasize don't focus on your eyes because you see WA and you think, oh, ah, right? That A is ah. No, it depends on the word. Okay. So good question. Very good question. So it's not that you can use without any problem. It's that you have to use There's no other option there. Yeah. The curious soul, comfort, long, complex sentences. What? And always end up feeling anxious after writing anything. Comfort. What? Doesn't make any sense. Comfort, long, complex sentences. I don't. The second part makes sense. You say, and always end up feeling anxious after writing anything. Did I miss something, or did part of your message not go through? Because yeah, that doesn't really make sense. Comfort, long, complex sentences doesn't make any sense to me. Some dictionaries do include really. Are you serious? That's another reason why I would say don't go to the dictionary for pronunciation information. Um, what? Let's see, IPA. Yeah, okay. I guess maybe some people say it that way. Like what? What? If it were, say, British English And I heard somebody say with like that the voiceless W, like they say what, what do you want? Um, then that sounds okay. It doesn't sound American to me at all. I guess maybe some Americans speak that way, maybe, but I would be very surprised. Like I've never heard was or what pronounced with ah. Like it would be super strange to me. It would definitely stand out as like an accent to me. Um, yeah, and I like it's very cheeky, David. Put the little halo angel smiley face, but some dictionaries do include it. Yeah. Anyway, um, whatever. It's it's stupid. Okay, so there's a comment above. Oh man, it didn't come through. Yeah, exactly. That's why it might have been too long because if you try to type something that's too long, YouTube just like won't send it. It usually tells you there's like it actually shouldn't let you put it through. I don't know if it accidentally let you put it through, but um, yes, I picked up on it. Um, but anyway, uh, yeah. Even if there are some speakers who do pronounce it that way, at the very least, I would say that's not standard. Like it's weird. It's very, very weird. So I'm not saying it's wrong because if natives say it, and that's fine. However a native speaker speaks is fine because they're a native speaker. Um, but I wouldn't say that it's standard. Just because it's a possibility listed in the dictionary doesn't mean that it's the most common or that that it sounds normal or whatever. But anyway, okay, we're at an hour and 46 minutes, 47 minutes. It's 1:17 here, so we can easily go for another hour. 3 hours is kind of my cutoff. 3.5. I really don't want to go to 4. So we still have about half the time left, guys. And I caught up with the chat. This is not a good sign. Not a good sign at all. Rodrigo is here. Ooh, your membership little symbol thingy there changed color. Good job. That means that you have been a member for longer than a month, I believe. So for the members, how you have that little symbol next to your username, the longer that you're a member, that's going to change colors. And the color will correspond to like a certain number of months or whatever that you've been a member. So Rodrigo is the first one to reach the second color. Good job. Good job. More questions incoming. Yay. How would you pronounce the words? That's a word. Yeah, I was kind of thinking it must be related to hotels. And in the second word, I think, is there a typo there? I think there's a letter missing. The first one, I've maybe have heard once in my life. I would try to pronounce it hotelier, which is probably not even right. Like that is such an uncommon word, like in general speech that I wasn't even sure if that was a word. Yeah, we're chameleons. Yeah, exactly. uh, that is really funny to me. Sharing. Oh, that's not misspelled. Okay, then there might be something going on here. Ah, okay, so there's something going on here. Interesting. So, huh. Yeah, so okay. Hotelier. Um, hotelier. Yeah, that sounds like it should probably be pronounced that way. Hotelier. Yeah, it sounds very fancy. So that would be a manager or owner of a hotel or inn. And you know what we usually call the hotelier? We call it the manor or the manager or the owner. That's what we use. So we say the owner of the hotel, the manager of the hotel. Like very rarely will people say hotelier. Or apparently hotelier is another pronunciation, so I guess I'm okay with that. But and then we have an interesting thing with the other word because I was thinking that there was a typo here because of the way that we pronounce it. I've never seen this word spelled, will tell you how common it is. It's not particularly common, but this particular word is a little bit more common. It could also be because I've watched a lot of, or I historically, I don't commonly do it, but historically, over at my grandparents' house, sometimes they would be watching those like shows about like where they like completely remodel a house or a restaurant or something. And so I've seen quite a few episodes of those. So maybe I've heard this word a little bit more because of that. But the way that I pronounce it and the way that I've only ever heard it pronounced is restaurateur. So there's an N in there, not restaurateur, restaurateur, like restaurant, restaurateur. That makes sense. um, but apparently that's actually not in the spelling and it's not supposed to be in the pronunciation according to the dictionary. Um, so that's why it seems strange to me. But again, just like with hotelier, um, a restaurateur is the owner or manager of a restaurant, and we call them the owner or the manager most commonly. We don't call them a restaurateur. It, it's not the common way to refer to these people, owner or manager. So, interesting words to know. If you want to know them, know them. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend using them in everyday speech. Like if you want to sound kind of fancy, you'll probably sound fancy if you use them, and that works. But most people won't actually use those words. I think. How to read this? I don't know. You put those. You put those. I always want to say like quotations, apostrophe, and comma. My brain always wants to spit out one of those anytime I see one of those symbols, and it's not always right. Apostrophes. You put the apostrophe, so I'm really not sure. Because it should be the word money, but I don't know why the apostrophes are there. So if you can, like, did you see that in like the lyrics of something? I assume. Because I really have no idea how to answer that. Like putting apostrophes there doesn't make any sense. Um, but I don't want to follow the recommended one idea per sentence either, because when I do it, all the sentences come out boring. So I always end up trading my annoyance of writing simple sentences with comfort. See, now that makes sense. Okay, but I don't want to follow the recommended one idea per sentence either, because when I do it, all the sentences come out boring. So I always, okay, yeah, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that's not necessarily the most effective thing to do for various reasons. So I do have some ideas of how to use writing to help your general language skills, especially your speaking skills, and we can definitely talk about that. But yeah, writing like, okay, oh, I wrote an example sentence. I like dogs. Okay, the car is blue. Okay, like you're not going to get a whole lot out of that. Now, if you're walking down the street and you see a blue car and you're trying to think in English, you say, oh, okay, how would I say that? The car is blue, or I see a blue car, right? Then those little sentences can be really useful, especially because you're actually trying to use them in your thoughts or in your speech. But writing, disconnected example sentences, like maybe for an absolute beginner, which in my opinion, absolute beginners shouldn't be really writing anyway. They need to be focusing on the sound. But anyway, yeah, I feel your pain there. I went through that with Spanish, and I was like, I don't like this. So I always end up trading my annoyance of writing simple sentences with comfort. Long, complex sentences and always end up feeling anxious after writing anything. For comfort, okay, so for comfort, we would say maybe slash if you're going to put a thing there, we say comfort, and instead write long complex sentences and always end up feeling anxious after writing anything. Um, yeah, it sucks. It shouldn't be that way. You're going to feel kind of, wait, okay, frustration. F stands for frustration. um, Comment got canceled. You can skip my comment for now. Yeah, because I was like, maybe there's another piece there. Um, my first part of the comment is below. I guess that would be above because I would call that above because it's upward in the chat history. But okay, anyway, whatever it is, send it to me on Patreon, and then I'll figure it out. Just tell me when you send it, unless you don't want to retype it all, and then we'll just whatever. It doesn't matter. Um, but regardless, I mean, whether you're writing short sentences, complex sentences, you're feeling anxious, whatever, that's normal, and with more time, more practice, I mean, you're going to kind of feel less of that. But as I said, I will tell you, like, generally, you do very well. So no need to feel anxious. Because that kind of just makes you feel like, oh, I don't want to do this, right? It takes too much energy and whatever to like try to write something. So just kind of relax. Like if you make a mistake, you make a mistake, you know. And sometimes, right? Actually, it's a very common unintentional mistake and problem that intermediate learners have before they reach the advanced level, where they try to make everything so complicated. This happens in languages, programming, it happens in all skills, where like you're trying to be fancy and cool and like, oh yeah, see, I speak this language and I can make these complex sentences. And like maybe you're not trying to seem cool, but like you're trying to use the language better, right? When in actuality, a lot of what natives say from day to day are just simple sentences. And usually you end up trying to make like this really long, complex thing that you could have just said in like 5 words, you know? And so it's a normal part of the process. Like the beginners do things simple because that's where they are. Intermediate, they have what I call what do I call it? Intermediate eyes, where they try to make everything complicated, and for good reason. It's natural. But they try to make everything complicated, and then experts make everything simple again, right? Except they do it better than beginners. So that's always the trajectory: simple to complex, unnecessarily complex, back to simple. Um, right? It's not about the length of the sentence. It's just like if you're making YouTube videos. This is one thing they say if you're like, how do I make YouTube videos, right? One thing a lot of people will tell you is don't try to make a video to fit a certain length. Make the video as long as you need to convey the information you're trying to give, right? So if that comes out to 2 minutes, you have a 2 minute video. If that comes out to 10 minutes, you have a 10-minute video. If that comes out to an hour, you have an hour long video. Maybe you can cut it into parts for ease of watching, but um, it took you that long to give that information. So it's the same thing in any communication. If you're writing, if you're speaking, it doesn't matter how complex the sentence is. It depends on what you're trying to say and then delivering that information in the best way possible. Usually we like the easiest way possible. So that doesn't mean don't try to make complicated things. Don't try to play with the language because that's good practice. And you kind of need to kind of work your way through that to get up to that expert level where you can then simplify things more. But at the same time, don't feel super anxious and frustrated because you don't want to make boring short sentences and then the long sentences stress you out. Just communicate what you want to communicate. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. If it's a short sentence, it's a short sentence. Okay. If the person doesn't understand, they'll tell you, and then you can try again by making it either less complex or, if needed, more complex because you maybe didn't give enough information. Um, and you'll learn through that process of what you need to do when. That's all it is. It's again shooting the arrow. You make a mistake, something doesn't go well, you don't communicate what you wanted to communicate, you know, you didn't hit the target. So you make a little change, try again. Not a big deal. Okay, what do you call the shoes you wear outdoors? Shoes. I mean, That's what shoes are. I like to refer to them as rare miss for David. I like to refer to them as running shoes. But I've also heard tennis shoes, gym shoes, sneakers, and confused face. Yes. I like to call them confused face myself. Outdoors or sport-like activities, I should add. Okay, so that's a good addition to the question. Yeah, because obviously, like shoes, obviously are shoes. Of course, you wear them outdoors. It's like we don't wear shoes indoors. Like, well, I guess some people do. We don't take our shoes. A lot of Americans don't take our shoes off inside. I know in some cultures, like in Japan, that's very popular. Um, but yeah, so like sporting shoes, it kind of depends. Like at the end of the day, uh, so like you can use like there are shoes made specifically for running, and I'm sure maybe there's some small advantage or comfort or whatever compared to just wearing like a plain old pair of shoes. But it really doesn't matter that much. Like I think it's mostly marketing, especially because when it comes to running, I know this is a tangent and doesn't answer your question, but this is a little thing that bugs me. I have I have a pair of tennis shoes. I usually call them tennis shoes. Uh, that I never wear, especially because if I do wear shoes, I usually wear flip flops or sandals, which are synonyms. I wear flip flops because I live by the beach. I grew up by the beach, and pretty much anywhere I go, that's all I wear. But if I do need to, say, if I'm gonna go, maybe run somewhere, or I need something that's actually gonna stay on my feet really nice and solidly, I actually have a pair of barefoot shoes. Which, if you're gonna go running, barefoot shoes are so much better for your body than these padded shoes where you can't feel anything. That's actually hurting your body. But anyway, that aside, that's a completely different topic. Um, Running shoes can be called tennis shoes, can be called gym shoes, can be called sneakers. If they're gym shoes, all that means if you call them gym shoes, it just means you specifically use them for the gym. That's all that tells us. You could easily call them tennis shoes. Um, Sneakers can be a bit different. So you can call tennis shoes sneakers. It doesn't particularly matter, but sneakers can also be for non-sports. Um, like I can't even think of it. I mean, they're probably going to be maybe a little bit more active than like they're not dress shoes, obviously. Like we don't call dress shoes sneakers; those are dress shoes. Those are fancy shoes. So sneakers is maybe a little bit more general, but it doesn't really matter what you call them. I like the term tennis shoes, so that's what I call them. Yeah, they're tennis shoes. Um, oh, and by the way, curious soul, I appreciate the censoring, self-censoring. It works. Um, but anyway, by the way, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I wonder if you sent that over on Patreon. Let's find out. Um, oh, I'm so hungry. My stomach, because I forgot to eat. I always do that. Um, and my soda is gone. I'm gonna die, guys. I'm gonna starve. Okay, so what are some coping techniques you could recommend for when I just can't make out a word or sentence in a movie or TV show in like a fast-paced dialogue, and even after slowing it down, my brain refuses to decipher the sounds correctly? Ear training. Ear training is the coping technique. Um, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to continuing to train your ears, but things that can maybe help you in the moment, I guess, or in the shorter term. Subtitles. uh, Generally, as you probably know, I do not recommend the use of subtitles, especially if you're trying to improve your listening. But if you if you listen to something, you're watching something, right? Now, obviously, this is assuming that it's not, live. What was that? That you have I just got distracted. Somebody was yelling. I don't know. It's something like, let's say, like a video where you can rewind it. Of course, these days, usually that's the case. So you want to say, take that little part and then, go back, listen to it again, go back, listen to it again, go back, listen to it again, And if you still can't figure it out, maybe like, especially if it's on YouTube or if you can like extract the audio and put it into Audacity or some tool to slow it down. On YouTube, you can just put it at like 0.5 speed or something. And if you still can't understand it, um, then you can use the subtitles. And the subtitles aren't guaranteed to be right, especially because sometimes when people do subtitles, they take the meaning and not the exact word for word. So sometimes the sentence you see written may actually be completely different than the sentence they said, but it means the same thing. Um, so you got to be careful for that. But if it is a word for word subtitle and there isn't a mistake, which usually there's not, but sometimes they make little mistakes or typos or whatever, um, then that would be your last resort. The only other thing that you could do, which I know this is kind of inconvenient, you can you know have a friend come listen to it, or if you have to send it to somebody, you can take that exact timestamp on that video, send it to them like a native speaker, and say, "What is this person saying?" That would be like the very last resort if the subtitles don't work, um, and then they can tell you for sure, like it's almost guaranteed. Um, and if they can't tell you, then you have no reason to feel bad because it's maybe the person just really said it unclearly and the context isn't clear enough, and who knows? And if a native can't really understand, then I guess it doesn't really matter. But that will usually not be the case. 99.9999999% of the time, we will be able to understand. So that's what I would say for that. Just go through your process. Use subtitles if you have to. I was seeing in English and English. We need an N there, right? Because it's before a vowel sound. And you want to feel that. I know this isn't your question, but it's important. Natives do sometimes break this rule, and maybe that's why. Because I think especially in like the rap hip hop, like the way people speak, I think they break this rule more often. Instead of saying "an" plus vowel, they'll just say "a." So English subtitles or English something, and I do that sometimes too. Like it's not right, but it's something that actually might be changing where we're simplifying the language a bit. But it does also sound a bit better, and it's very natural for most natives to put that "n" there before a vowel. So what I would recommend is try to get into the habit of feeling that. Like if the next sound is going to be a vowel, like it just automatically changes into N. Like the N starts naturally coming out, and you can target that and practice that. But I was seeing an English subtitles for a Brazilian song. Okay, ugh, I was watching. Oh, okay, I see. Because now, yeah, I didn't understand the sentence at first. So I was not seeing. Seeing sounds very passive. It's like it's just like it's in your vision. I was looking at would work a bit better, or I was reading. And we would actually probably say the English subtitles because it's specifically the English subtitles instead of the Portuguese subtitles. Unless you have multiple versions of the English subtitles from different people, in which case A would be better. But anyway, I was looking at the English subtitles for a Brazilian song, okay, and I saw that money in my purse. Okay, I saw money in my purse. You can't imagine why these apostrophes. Not at all. That doesn't mean anything to me at all. What we'll commonly do to use apostrophes, like for example, instead of saying walking, right? Whether you use n or ng, whether you use e or I, it doesn't matter. But that would be the full pronunciation. If we say the informal, slightly more informal sounding walking, I'm walking down the street, that is only pronounced with I and a regular N. Okay. And if we were to write that, because we want it to be read as that informal version specifically, then we would, instead of writing that G, we put an apostrophe, right? And that's a common use of the apostrophe to change like how words should kind of be pronounced or whatever, or like if we maybe drop a sound sometimes in more informal speech, if we write it, maybe we'll put an apostrophe to replace that letter. Um, And so that's where my mind went at first, but because MON is there and then EY is there, like the whole word is there. So it doesn't make any sense to me. Oh, we have a first super chat. Um, okay, so I'm going to finish this one up really quick and then I have to get to the super chat. So he jumped the line, guys. Sorry. Um, but yeah, so the maybe he really emphasized the word or something. And so, like, but we still wouldn't do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. I have no idea. Absolutely no idea why they would put the apostrophes there. Okay, so I have to jump to my super chat. Can I click on this? This is my first super chat ever? Yes. Okay, Rodrigo with the very first super chat. This is history. English hacks history. Good job. Okay. Do you have any favorite English words? Mine are the words so and pa. That's a weird thing to super chat, but okay, we'll go with it. I know you probably just want to support me a little bit more. And you're like, here, I'm going to use this feature. Um, Woohoo! Yeah, exactly. So, do I have any favorite English words? Probably off the top of my head, I don't think so. I'd have to think about that. Um, there was actually a word that I used the other day in a class, like that came up, and I was like, I really like that word, but I don't remember what it was. So and pa. Pa is kind of a fun word. Yeah. Um, so I don't know. Unfortunately, I'll have to maybe think about that and tell you next time. Because off the top of my head, I don't really think of like, oh, this is my top five favorite English words. Like maybe in Spanish, but even then, yeah. Anyway, I don't really keep track of favorite words. Although I will say one, um, anti-disestablishmentarianism, only because it's really, really long. It's like one of the longest words in English. Anti-disestablishmentarianism. That's a fun word. Or no, there we go. Definitely, I would include this in my favorite words. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Only because it's technically not a word, and I think it's the single longest word in English. It's from Mary Poppins. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. There you go. But I'll try to think of some other words that maybe I really like in English. Okay, so back to where we were in the chat. I don't want to follow the recommended one idea per sentence either. Wait, oh, did we already do that? Oh, I see. I see. Okay, so yeah, got it. Okay, I don't want to follow the recommended one idea per sentence either because when I do it, all the sentences come out boring. So I always end up trading my annoyance of writing simple sentences with. No, we already did that. I thought that was like a retry there. Okay. Uh, okay. Good, good, good. Okay, so here we are. So the curious soul. Oh, proper. This was the first part of my comment. Proper. It's so disjointed now. Disjointed. That's a fun word. um, I don't know. I don't want to have you like rewrite everything, but if you could just write out exactly what it was, like copy and paste the pieces, send it to me on Patreon because I don't even know what goes where anymore. I'm lost on that. Um, and then let me know if you send it on Patreon and I can look at it. But if you want to send it later, that's fine too. Or if it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter. I'm living for the shoe hacks. Put twice for some reason. Maybe it didn't. It took a second to load, and you didn't think it went through. I don't know. I'm living for the shoe hacks. The shoe hacks. Well, shoe hacks might be better than English hacks. I mean, if we're talking practical, there's not much more practical than shoes. So, but I don't have any hacks for that, unless you want to just call everything tennis shoes. In which case, you could probably do that, unless they're dress shoes or flip flops. Um, Okay, curious soul. Third part. Oh, trading my annoyance of writing my soul. Oh wait, so okay, we're doing first part and then third part. See, okay, what was the second part then? I don't know. I'm lost. As I said, I'm lost there. Is ST and NT ending clusters are just so you said is and then blah 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 are. So you said to be, right? So it's a question, and we're talking about ST and NT, which is two things. So we want to say are ST and NT ending clusters, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Um, So are ST and ending clusters, ND, ST and NT ending clusters just the exceptions for dropping the T? Yeah, so this was a comment recently. I'm a little bit behind on the comments, as I mentioned earlier in the live stream. I will go ahead and answer this now, because I know this was asked, I think, yesterday. So it's a good question because I never actually thought about it this way. And when you say just the exceptions, I think you mean are the only, like, are they the only exceptions? So like if there were any other consonant T ending combination, then it wouldn't apply. And it's kind of dynamic. For the NT, right, which again, the T is always possible, but very commonly we'll drop the T if it connects to a vowel. If it connects to a vowel, okay? So this is very specific, as you say, right? For dropping the T, then link the consonant S or N in a vowel. So that's NT plus vowel rule. Now the ST is actually not part of that same idea because if it's NT plus consonant, like want some, right? Want some. There's still going to be at least some sort of hold or stop on that T. Want some, and it's not going to drop, which we know because we're talking about the vowel. But for the ST, it doesn't matter if the next sound is a vowel. That's completely different. Okay. That's just because of how the S is and how the T is. If you have S and T at the end, again, the T is always possible. It could come out, especially if we're enunciating. But very commonly, we're going to drop the T, and it doesn't matter what's after it. It's because of the S and because of the nature of the T and the relationship between the two. So I could say first offer. First offer. First offer. I can connect the S. That's okay. I can also connect the T. First offer. First offer. So that will also commonly happen. If it's say first and then a consonant, like first, I don't want to say time because that's also a T. First memory. Okay, I can say first memory, drop the T. S also does connect to M. S connects to a lot of consonants, unlike other consonant sounds. That's a special case. But or I can say first memory. First memory. I can push out that T to make it a little clearer and enunciated. That's possible. So your question kind of like isn't really the right question because NT plus vowel is a special case where ST is just in general. We commonly drop the T. And then there are probably other cases where we would commonly drop the T too. But the T at the end, like say for example, the word that, which is a very common, usually function word, grammar word. The T in that or the T in but, right? These really common little grammar words can commonly just be dropped, especially in faster speech, right? So unless it links to a vowel, if I say but I, we're probably going to flap it and connect it. But if I say but and my, but my car, right? But my car, but my car, or that store, that store. Probably we're gonna stop that store, but we could potentially drop it at that store. That store is really cool. So that's a sort of another special category where the T might drop with these really common function or grammar words. So the T is just really special in a lot of ways, especially in American English. It has times where we commonly drop it. We have times where we might not drop it. Like NT plus consonant, we don't, but NT plus vowel, we do. Usually, we don't have to, but we usually do. Sometimes it turns into a flap D when it connects over to a vowel or whatever, or like Goda. That's sort of a special case with two. So there's like probably a million rules for T, depending on like what sounds before it, what sounds after it. Is it a common function word? Is it a content word? You know, like what's going on. And there's going to be things that maybe usually happen very commonly, and then things that don't. So when we get down to the little details of the T, it can get kind of complicated. And what I would generally recommend is learn the higher level details. So, like if T in American English connects to a vowel, it becomes a flap D. That's a core part of the American accent. You have to do that if you want to sound American. Most of the time, anyway. Sometimes we'll enunciate it as a T, but 99.9% of the time, it's a flap D. And then, right, the strong T, the weak T is just basic aspirated, unaspirated. The stop T, be able to do the stop T. And then outside of that top level basic rules of how the T should be pronounced, there are some really common special rules like NT plus vowel that are useful to know. But then when it comes down to all the little tiny details, it's like you could just pronounce it as a T. Like just follow the top level rules. Or if you know like ST, the T can commonly drop, or the T can always drop. We don't always do it, but we commonly do. Then that's another case. Just drop the T, right? Um, so you kind of learn these piece by piece for the really specific ones, and you don't actually have to learn all the little tiny exceptions and details, because it's not going to matter that much. Evo, hey Josh, how's it going? Good afternoon. Yes, sorry it took me a second to get here. I'm a bit behind. But I am well, and I hope you are as well. David, no food, no soda. That's a nightmare scenario. Order in today. Yeah. And there's a picture of pizza. Yeah, I want pizza so bad. See, because since I'm vegan, I can't just like order pizza because we don't have those options. So I have to make, if I want pizza, I have to make my own, which I do. Occasionally, I will make my own pizza, and it is super awesome and delicious. But this is just making me hungrier. It's all David's fault. I blame David. Yeah. Anyway, the curious soul. So, how do I get the proper balance with this issue where the sentences are just right? Well, I was kind of trying to explain that. I don't know if you were trying to like retype, but just focus on communicating what you want to communicate. That's the core idea. If it's a short sentence and a short sentence says what you want to say, write a short sentence. If you need a longer sentence that's more complex, and maybe you have some additional little description that you want to throw in there that maybe shifts the intonation, and we use commas around it and all that all that technical stuff. That's what you need, right? Like I just did right there, right? So it's like if you need more information, like for example, comma, if there's rise in intonation and you use commas, blah blah blah, comma, then use that, right? So it just depends on what you're trying to communicate and why. So I wouldn't focus on whether it's speaking or writing. I wouldn't focus on how simple or complex the sentence is. I would just focus on, okay, what do I want to say? And then just try to say it. Like, and of course, if more advanced grammar that you're trying to work in, you can target that, and you can practice that and try to work that into practice writing and stuff. Not necessarily single sentences. You can choose a topic, like I think David mentioned that earlier. You can choose a particular topic, and say you're trying to do like the third conditional, right, which is more of an advanced grammar structure. Then you're intentionally trying to write maybe more complex sentences. For the purpose of being able to do that better, right? But most of the time, don't try to write longer, complex sentences. Just communicate, right? Do whatever you think is necessary for a particular sentence to make sense. If it's short, it's short. If it's long, it's long. Okay. And if you approach it that way, I think it's gonna help balance it out for you. And I know it's kind of easier said than done. It's not necessarily so simple, but try to approach it that way, and it might help. But okay, if you're emphasizing, you can aspirate the PTSD, FT. This is another recent comment I haven't answered yet. Okay, if you're emphasizing, you can aspirate everything. Now, if it's a voice sound, that doesn't mean that we're going to hear the breath, because we're not going to do that. But it will mean that it's stronger. Because what is emphasis? Emphasis. Let's think about this. It seems so obvious, but to some people it might not be so obvious. So let's make this very, very plain and clear. Emphasis, emphasizing, right? We're being emphatic. And that means that we're giving more attention, like I just said, more attention to a particular word, maybe a particular syllable in the flow of speech for whatever reason. Okay, it could be for a particular effect. It could be to contrast this and that, right? No, I want to do it, not him. Various reasons why we might emphasize. Um, and of course, when we emphasize, we tend to enunciate a bit more because we're giving more attention, more loudness to that particular word or syllable. Okay, so emphasizing and enunciation, they kind of go together, right? They're not the same thing necessarily, but they naturally kind of go together. And so the more that you emphasize something, the more you're probably going to enunciate it. And let's say there's a PT and ST or FT, whatever T at the end, or it could just be a T, it doesn't matter. If you are emphasizing, it's not necessarily guaranteed, not that necessarily you have to. Like I could say, that is a good idea. So I emphasize the word that, but I still use the stop, right? Because the T in that position is very commonly a stop. Or I could even say that is a good idea. That is it is, and I actually flap that D at the end there and connect it over. That's another way I could do it. Or I could say that is a good idea. Nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine too. So again, there's not just one right answer here. It's not so black and white. Like, oh, if I'm emphasizing, does it aspirate, right? And you're saying can, so you're not just saying does it aspirate, but can it aspirate? But yes, you can aspirate it. So if I say, I kept the money, I kept the money, kept the. Now, because of how T works and because it has a lot of craziness and it's kind of like a weak sound in general anyway, it's just air. Um, even if we're emphasizing, like we might not really push it out to where it's super strong, like I kept the money. That might sound kind of like there's a certain emotion, or you're really, really trying to enunciate to make it super, super, super clear for a very special reason. So we still might aspirate it more than just like a weak T, but not necessarily like pushing it out really strongly, like kept, right? Like kept, right? So it's like sort of like a medium. It's not quite weak, not quite strong. Um, or last, right? So um, that was the last one. The last one. It's going to sort of mix with the W there. Last one. That's fine. Yeah. So you can aspirate it, but I wouldn't make it super, super like crazy strong. Just make it clear. You and again, that's something you can do. There's going to be many different possibilities depending on what's going on. Evo, I have a question. In a sentence like "it could be better," is it possible that it may be pronounced like "it could be better"? I mean, dropping the T in it and the D in could due to assimilation, or like it it could be due to the assimilation. Good question. Very good question. So the short answer is yes. um, why? Well, as you said, assimilation. We have, and this isn't always necessarily the answer because sometimes this isn't present, but it's actually very common that if we have two stop sounds, they don't have to be the same stop sound, because if they're the same stop sound, it's going to be there's a special thing that might come into play there, where we hold the stop sound. But here we have like it to could. There's a T and a K, which are both stop sounds, but they're different stop sounds. So what we can actually do is stop the K and then release the K. It could. It could. So we're actually not doing the T at all there. And what I could even do is, like you said in the first case, I can actually just drop that stop K. In the case of it, this might be a special case because it's a function word, but it could. It could. So I'm not trying to hold it. I'm just pushing out that second K. So two ways to do that. That's fine. And then again, we could drop the D. Could be. Could be. Could be. That can happen. Or I can sort of I could either hold, well, yeah, if we're doing a simulation, because D and B are both voiced stops. Instead of stopping in the D and then releasing a B, I can actually stop in the B and release a B. Could be. It could be. It could be. Yeah. Now it's a little less clear that way. So it sounds maybe a little bit lazier, might sound slightly more informal in a way, but especially in faster speech, that is a way that natives will speak, and there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah. Um, so very good question. Yeah. About the aspiration of stop consonants at the end of a word. Um, I know in kind of makes sense because the word is a container, but we say, whether it's a word or not, we say at the beginning, in the middle, because it's in the process, right, in the whole thing, and then at the end. So it's like the start and end point. But aspiration of consonants at the end of a word, how would you explain its range? Yeah. Um, this question again. Okay. See if I can put this simply, put it in a simpler way. So sounds in English have generally, most sounds will have a range. Okay. And because of that, especially with the stop sounds, it can get very complicated. But because of that, the how the range works for pretty much any sound, the slower or clearly you're speaking, the more enunciated it is, and or maybe even the more emphasized it is, because those kind of go together. The more that something will be pronounced in a clear, stronger way. Okay. In general, that's just the general tendency as you're on this side of the range. So that's like if if you're following Elsa, the Elsa app, it's going to basically tell you to speak like this all the time, which is why I don't recommend it because it sounds unnatural and can make you harder to understand. But for example, if you very clearly enunciate every single, let's see, I can't even do it because I said enunciate and I stopped it. If you very clearly enunciate every single sound and try to make it very, very clear, regardless of where that sound, see that sound is in the word or in the flow of speech, then you will sound something like this, which is very unnatural. In fact, it sounds like you're trying to explain something to someone who's like a 5-year-old, right? Or someone who's like you think they're really stupid, and so you have to say everything super clearly. Um, on the other end of the range, we speak faster and faster, right? So the normal speech is through here, and then there's really fast speech that could be a little after that. Or if we're just speaking kind of lazily, especially with vowels, where maybe like we kind of cut some diphthong sounds or we reduce to a schwa. That's one reason we reduce because it's sort of this neutral central position. Um, so, like for example, in what's a word here? Okay, like in the word enough, the fully enunciated word uses e. It's that e sound, and I can enough, right? That can reduce to I or the schwa sound. And so if I very clearly enunciate it, I'm probably going to say E, enough. Okay. But normally in the flow of speech, oh no, thanks, I've had enough. I don't need any more food. Enough, enough, enough. It could be as well, but enough. A schwa sound. Okay. Because we're speaking faster, we're not taking the time to clearly enunciate that sound because it's not stressed. It tends to reduce in that for that particular word on that syllable. And so that first syllable has a range between E to I or You can even say E, I, would be like the full range of how we can reduce it. So there's actually some reduction ranges that can also apply to some words. But for the sound itself, right, if I clearly say it's E, or I can speak normally, and most likely it'll come out as an or maybe an I. Um, so reductions are sort of a little lazier. We're not taking the time to fully enunciate every single sound because we don't always have to. And then the logical opposite of a nice, clear, full sound would be a dropped sound, but that only applies in some cases, like maybe where some places where we can drop a T at the end of a word or this or that, whatever. So that would be the full range. Nice, good, clear sound to potentially dropped sound. Um, and pretty much every sound will have some sort of range in there. And it might work a little bit differently, like the TH range works a little bit differently than some of the other ones. Vowel ranges work a little bit differently in the mouth than consonant ranges, but it's the same concept. And we don't have to worry about all that. I'm going to be making lessons about the range and flow later about a lot of different things. So this specifically, the aspiration of stop consonants at the end of a word. If the reason why I said all that is because if for whatever reason, in whatever you are saying, if you have words that end in stop consonants in what you are saying, if you are speaking slower, more clearly, we are emphasizing more, maybe. It doesn't have to be super, super slow. It doesn't have to be super, super clear. But the more that you tend to move over in this direction, the more likely that we're going to hear, instead of stopping the stop sound at the end of a word, the more likely it's actually going to be pronounced, whether that's just a little weak sound, like I can say instead of that, I say that. I may not even hear that. That. There's a little T, could come out. Or may I say that. That. I like that. Good idea. Okay. I might happen to push it out a little more. Okay. There's not a right answer here. Now, I said the word that kind of quickly, but because I was emphasizing it so much and saying it so clearly, I let that T kind of come out with everything else. Like I'm just pushing out the whole word nice and clearly. That. Right. Now, we wouldn't normally say it that way, but it's possible, especially if I'm really emphasizing, if I'm speaking more slowly. So it depends on, again, we use enunciation as a tool when we need it, not as the normal way of speech. So the way that you guys are usually taught is, right, clearly enunciate. These are the rules. Always do this, right? Okay, maybe there's an exception here or there, but you should always be clearly enunciating, following these rules. And then you end up sounding like, and that's fine if your goal is to be understood and to sound well, like sound good. That's good. That's good advice. And that's where most teachers will steer you. They'll steer you in that direction because at the end of the day, I would even agree, the main point of learning a language is to communicate, right? You have to be understood. Which is why pronunciation, like learning pronunciation, isn't 100% required. At least a little pronunciation can give you a big benefit and help you be understood better and understand better. But it's not completely a required area. It just gives you a huge benefit if you do it, if you actually do spend time with it, for both your speaking and your listening. So most teachers emphasize that you should spend your time over here on this end of the range. My whole point, one of my things on my channel is that's not the way natives speak, right? At least not most of the time. And so if your goal is just to be understood, you can be over here just fine. We'll understand you well. You'll sound really good, but you won't sound completely natural, right? And when we get into this natural, again, it gets a little messy. Real speech is messy. It's complicated. There's multiple things that might be able to happen in a particular case, and you don't have to be able to produce all those cases necessarily. But if you want to sound natural, you can't spend all your time over here speaking really clear and enunciated, because that's not the way natives speak most of the time. We use it as a tool, and that's my point. With a lot of, well, not a lot of what I teach, but that's one of my points in the way I teach pronunciation is I'm trying to teach you how to sound natural, not just understood, right? So specifically to this question, as I said, the range just depends on how you're speaking for a particular reason, right? Are you more over on this end for that particular word, or maybe that particular sentence? If you have a reason to do it for every word in the sentence, then it's more likely that that stop consonant at the end Might, still doesn't have to, but it might come out more aspirated. It could happen. Not likely, even at that end. um, but then, of course, you move over here, and it's even less likely that it's going to be aspirated. Maybe unaspirated instead of stopped. And then, of course, we know there's certain linking and stuff that could happen that reactivates it. But if there's nothing like that and it would normally stop, the farther you move over here, the more likely it's going to completely stop or maybe even drop, depending. And so that's again the range, dropping the stop at the end instead of holding it, or pushing it out either unaspirated or maybe fully aspirated, right? It's all part of the range. It's a dynamic range and flow of real American speech. So I hope that makes sense. It might not make sense, but if it does, that's good. I know so repetitive, but like when do you pronounce the aspiration of it in an aspiration as a native English speaker? Yeah, so again, everything I just said, that's how I would explain that. Okay. Um, and again, I will be making lessons about that for various sounds in the future. So if it's still kind of confusing, if it's still not clear, I'm really trying to talk like in very general terms, just like sounds in general. I'm trying to address the stops in particular here, but I will be making lessons for like the range of the T and D sounds, the range of the ah sound. I already made one for the truth about the schwa and the range of that. So there will be more lessons related to that in the future, and then the concept will probably become a bit clearer. But okay, David, can I test you on some of the stuff I couldn't make out? Both of the cases happen to occur in these short intros to two random music videos. Well, that's probably another problem with music. But yeah, I mean, you can send them. YouTube won't let you send the link, so you can send them on Patreon. See if you already have. No. Yeah, and I'll check them out. It's fine. No, the comment above proper. Where is my comment disappearing? Yeah, I don't know what's happening with that. As I said, just send it on Patreon. Last try, I'm going to give it back to this. Okay, let's see if it works. But I don't want to follow the recommended one idea per sentence either because I do it all. The sentence come out boring. So I always end up trading my annoyance of writing simple sentences with complex sentences I am never comfortable with. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So is that what you were trying to say? My comment still didn't come through, but you answered it anyways. Okay, good. Okay, so bye, Curious Soul, if you're still here. Thanks for showing up. Glad I can answer your question anyway. Let's get back to where we were. Yeah, it was just like an ongoing, like same problem for half the stream. By the way, are some of the T's in Antarctica and Antarctic silent, or are they all fully pronounced? And are any of them flapped? Good question. So if I really clearly fully enunciate this, it would be Antarctica and Antarctic. So no. So they would be fully pronounced if I'm fully enunciating the word. Now Antarctica. The first T is a strong T. The second T is a weak T. So the second one is fully pronounced as far as a weak T goes. And then Antarctic, same thing there. But none of them flap. So let's see if I say this: Antarctica, Antarctica, Antarctica. See, that's where your question probably comes from. Antarctica or Antarctic, Antarctic. So there's another way to say this that's not fully enunciated for the whole word, and that is to say Antarctica. Now, one thing strange is happening and one thing normal is happening. The one thing that's normal is we actually have NT plus vowel inside of a word, which doesn't always work, but it very commonly will apply both between words and inside of words. It pretty much always applies between words, so you can always apply it. But with this, we can actually apply it here and say anar instead of antar. So you can just drop the T, the first T, which would mean I wouldn't call it silent. It's dropped. I would make a distinction there because if it's silent, it's just spelling, but in the full pronunciation, it is there. So we're actually dropping it. I guess you could say we're making it silent. Antarctica, Antarctic, Antarctic. This is the strange thing that's happening. And I think this is sort of an exception word. Maybe there's other words that might follow a pattern here. But normally we're not going to drop the K like a kt. We're not going to drop the K and then flap the D. That seems kind of weird. That stands out to me as strange. But in the pronunciation of this word, there's no problem with it. That's a common way to say it. So we're going to drop that K. We're going to flap the D because now it's between two vowels, and it's a weak T, right? So Antarctica, Antarctica, or Antarctic, Antarctic. So we'll do the same thing in the second one. We'll drop that K sound. So good question. Okay, Gabriel, is there any difference between a range? Oh, sorry, range. I was talking about range. A ranch and a cottage. Ranch. Yeah, I said ranch. A ranch and a cottage. Is there? There is. Yes. A ranch is actually to me, I mean, if we get down to specific technical definitions, I'd have to look in the dictionary. But to me, I would define a ranch as like there's a living building, right, like a house or whatever, and then there's some land, and specifically if it's a ranch, not a farm, then it's probably going to be for animals, especially cows or maybe horses. It could be a horse ranch. So there's some sort of animals there with some land and the living area. Where a cottage is just a type of building. So you can have a cottage on a ranch, where the ranch itself is kind of like the land. Or you could have a cottage in the mountains. Very commonly, cottage is used in the context of a mountain. So it's just like a nice little house that you can stay in. So yes, there's a big difference between them, I would say. My comment still didn't come through. Okay, I already got that. Thanks for your answer. I have another one. Although I think there's no rule. How can I know if the S sound is pronounced like a Z or an S? I know about verb noun rule, like house, houses. Yeah, that's stupid rule. So how can you know? At the end of the day, you can't. You have to focus on your ears. Focus on your ears. Input is always primary, right? Even if, say, like Benny Lewis takes a speak from day one approach, if he doesn't have any words, he can't say anything, right? So even if you immediately use, whether it's pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, even if you immediately use what you learn, input is always primary. You have to have that input come in first, and then you can try to use it if you want, or you can not try to use it and try to get more familiar with the language, and then try to use it later after you get used to hearing and understanding the language. That's what Steve Kaufman does on the other end. So here, at the end of the day, right? Okay, so you learn so verb and noun, which I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but the verb noun rule, which actually no, house is pronounced with an S, not a Z. It's not house. If you use actually, oh yeah, no, what am I talking about? I was thinking house and houses. Yeah, so house, to house something is a Z, and then a house or the house is an S. So that's correct at least for this pair. But at the end of the day, you need input and you need to focus on your ears. So you're going to hear house over and over and over and over. And let's say you never learned that rule. Okay, you're going to hear house and house and house and house. And provided that your ears are trained well enough to distinguish it as an S and not a Z, right? Then you're going to say house, right? But then, especially in this case, since house is a verb is much less common, you're sometimes going to hear somebody say house. And you're like, And then you notice, wait, according to what they're saying, we can house many people. That's a verb. And then you hear it somebody else, and maybe you look it up and you check and you say, oh, okay, it's a Z sound if it's a verb. Or maybe you hear it again from somebody else in a completely different context, and they say house is a verb, and you hear it as a Z again, and you say, there's that house with a Z again as a verb. Maybe the verb is pronounced as a Z. That makes sense. So Again, easier said than done. I'm kind of simplifying things a little bit, but that's the process. Focus on your ears. Okay. Some rules can be useful, yes, but regardless of how useful a particular rule is, as long as if it's 100% rule with no exceptions, then we could definitely say it's pretty useful. Um, Especially if it's not for like a small detail, but like a very big general thing. Uh, but at the end of the day, you got to hear it. 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 You can go to forvo.com to find speakers saying the example words. I already mentioned that to you, but in case other people who aren't familiar with that, forvo.com, it's a really good resource to find native speakers saying example words. Um, and it's not always going to be 100% the same, 100% perfect. Sometimes a couple of speakers might say it a little weird because there might be a regional thing going on, but generally it's a pretty solid resource. I will say for the S and the Z, one big common rule for the S and the Z that is kind of useful that I've mentioned before is with any S at the end, right? So there are exceptions to this, like house and house. This is obviously going to be an exception in some way because this is actually a sub rule of the rule that I'm talking about here. So the bigger rule is for any S at the end of a word. It could be a verb, it could be a noun, it could be the plural form of something. It doesn't matter what kind of word it is. Any S at the end, if the sound before it is voiceless, meaning it's a voiceless consonant because all vowels are voiced, um, then the S will be an S. There might be a couple small exceptions to that, but the S will be an S. If the sound before the S is a voiced consonant, then it will commonly, that voicing of the consonant will commonly change that written letter S into a Z sound. So it's not that it's like changing to an S, it's just that it's pronounced as a Z. And according to English spelling rules, we just spell with an S, right? Because like say the plural, right? So like houses, you don't say houses, say houses. So we naturally write the plural, whether it's S or ES, right? There's an S at the end to mark the plural for most words, but that's just the spelling convention. The pronunciation is actually a Z for that word. And there are exceptions. So it will generally work that way if the previous consonant sound is voiced, but there are some exceptions. And then because all vowels are voiced, if you have a vowel sound before the S, it's kind of up in the air. You really just have to hear it because I can say this, that's an S sound, or I can say those, right? Where it's a Z. It just depends on the word. So, um, but what about gracious? That is Z. Us. Right. Yeah, so gracious is an S. Oh yeah, but is Z. Us S, bus S. Emphasize. Well, that's even spelled with a Z, and yeah, no, that's not an S sound. That's a Z sound. It's not emphasize. That would be not a correct way to pronounce it. Emphasize, size. Now you might hear a little bit. One other thing to be aware of, especially for the consonants that aren't stop sounds, like the S or the F or whatever, um, there can be partial devoicing at the end of a word, which is where, and I say partial because we don't say emphasize, where it's straight into an S. But what can happen is we'll start the voiced version, and then as we sort of tail off and drop, towards the end of the word, um, the voice will drop with it, and the S will take over. So you might think there's an S there because technically there's like kind of an S at the very, very end, but we hit that Z first. So it's emphasize. Okay. Very, very important because it sounds wrong if you do emphasize. That's not a word. Now, emphasis as a noun, spelled S-I-S, that is an S sound, but emphasize is a Z sound. Analysis, same thing, analyze, that would also be a Z. Analysis, that's an S. Reason, reason. That's a Z. The Z, now maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe there's some random exceptions, but if you see the letter Z, it will not be pronounced as an S. Okay. Um, but if you see the letter S, commonly it's pronounced as an S, and commonly it's pronounced as a Z. Right. And specifically at the end of words, this is where it might be an S or a Z. And again, according to the rules I told you before, if it's a vowel before it, it just depends. If it's a voiceless consonant, it's an S. If it's a voiced consonant, it's a Z, with some exceptions. In the middle of a word like reason, that is also probably up in the air. But if it's at the start of a word, if you see an S at the start of a word, it's an S. So that one you don't really have to worry about. I don't think there are any exceptions to that. So yeah, it's complicated. It is complicated. And it seems a lot more complicated than it seems more difficult. It's complex. It seems more difficult than it probably is. This is again why I tell you to focus on your ears and not try to memorize rules, because if you try to memorize a bunch of rules, you're gonna, number one, it's just not really gonna help you anyway. But even if you were to memorize all those rules, and it were to kind of help you a little bit, you're kind of doing it the hard way. Just get lots of input, notice what you hear, train your ears, and just really listen to the language, listen to how people actually speak. And then if you're not sure, yeah, I mean, you can look it up, you can go to Forvo, you can do whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's always about the ears at the end of the day. The Z I try to pronounce sounds, right? Sounds weird to me. Sounds like a B. Well, it is supposed to be like a B. That's the Z sound. Buzz. That's the sound a B makes. Zzz. And I think I'm saying it the wrong way. Maybe so, maybe not. I would probably say not. You're probably doing it perfectly if you sound like a B. Now, there could be the exact quality of the sound. And again, when I say quality, I don't mean it in the way most teachers do. I mean the exact way that the sound is coming out. So, like, I could say, like, zzz, zzz. Now I'm kind of trying to put my tongue really forward. Zzz. Now there's a little interference because there's not enough space. Still sounds like a Z, but it sounds a little bit off, right? Because there's no space up here. So your exact placement, like how you're trying to place your tongue, it could be a bit off. Just because you sound like a B doesn't necessarily guarantee it. But if you have a nice clear zzz sound, then you should be fine. If you have time, look up Kesha, blah, 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 official music video at 8 seconds. I can hear, come on, we met at the blank to your TikTok, right? And then 2, Katy Perry, Wide Awake video at 17 seconds. Katy says, did you get something good? But the guy's response is unintelligible. Okay, I can send them over Patreon if you need to go grab some food. No, yeah, I'll look these up. Let me see if you sent them or not. No. Okay, so let's go to YouTube. YouTube's view. Okay, so it's Kesha blah blah blah. 8 seconds. I think. Huh. So what I'm hearing, see, so you put, we met at the, okay. What I'm hearing, which doesn't quite make sense to me, is we met the 5th of your TikTok. And that doesn't quite make sense. That can almost make sense in a number of ways, depending on how I try to parse the information and account for potentially dropped words. But it doesn't quite make sense. So if he's not saying that, I don't know what he's saying. He also does have quite an accent. Yeah, he sounds like he's from New Jersey. Yeah, definitely a upper, like a northeastern accent. I would be very surprised if he's not from Jersey. Um, Definitely somewhere around the New York area, if not Jersey. Um, Katie says, okay, so next one, Katy Perry, Wide Awake. Katy Perry, Wide Awake. Okay, and we have 17 seconds. Oh, I've seen this one before. Okay, it's very clear to me. Huh, interesting. Okay, so you said, so you're hearing, did you get something good? But the guy's response is unintelligible. She responds, yeah, I have that feeling. Okay. So good. So your analysis there is correct. Now what the guy says to me is very clear. It's not clear in terms of the volume, but I can very clearly understand what he's saying. Uh, so he says, it's gonna be amazing. Sure. So there you go. That one was easy. I can send that. Yeah, okay, we did that. By the way, before you go, any tips on how to fill up the awkward pauses of silence when a conversation comes to a stop and none of the parties have anything more to say? I really struggle with that. Not really, because I have that same problem in English. I don't generally talk to people anyway. um, so yeah, I really don't know. Because if I knew, I would use it myself. Um, but the direction that you want to try to go is maybe think of things in common. So if you know, which I mean, feel the awkward positive silence when a conversation comes to a stop. Yeah, so you need to think of something to say. So, like, say you know that they're interested in video games or something, right? And you say, "Oh, yeah, have you played any new video games recently?" Right? So you just think of something to talk about. It's um, and that can be really hard to do, especially if you're introverted. So that's why introverts always struggle with that because which if you're an introvert or anybody who's an introvert watching this will be like, yeah, that's true. It's like introverts, like we don't like to waste our energy usually talking about stuff unless it's somehow like meaningful to us or it has like there's like a purpose for talking about it, right? It's like I need to communicate with you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be communicating with you. I would be doing something else in my head, like whatever. Where an extrovert, it's very easy because they don't care if it's, pointless, meaningless chatter. They're happy talking, right? And so they can more easily just say, "Oh yeah, let's talk about this, talk about that." It doesn't really matter if it's like the weather. Like, who cares about the weather? Like, unless there's a tornado outside, the weather's not very interesting. So an introvert is like, how about the weather? I mean, it's been pretty sunny, right? Hot, interesting, not really. So yeah, I have that problem too. And one more nitpicky question: in at the end of the day, is the D in end realized as a dental D? Yes and no. Yes and no. At the end of the day, end of the day, end of the day, end of the day, and the end of the day, end of the day, at the end of the day, and So it can seem like a flap D. Um, it probably has something to do with the combination of sounds going from eh to n and then going to a schwa after in of. It's not actually a flap D, but the way that we release it going down into that schwa can kind of flick off a bit in a way that is similar to a D, but because the N is there, we have to make full contact. And we're not going to release the N and then do a flap. So it's physically impossible for it to be a flap D. Um, but we don't have to say and duh and duh and duh. We can, which is just a nice little like pull off. We kind of flap it off, like not flap it off, but like flick it off almost. And the. And so it's not actually a flap D, but it's almost like a hybrid. It can come out that way. It's a good question. I would ignore it. If it's interesting to you, great. If you want to use it, great. But for most people, I would ignore it. That's a small technicality of what can happen. Um, Good question though. Input is really vital. I must say your live streams are a great source of input. That's worth. Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. um, and there are probably better sources of input, but yeah, I mean, any kind of input is really good. But Rodrigo, I've known Forvo for a long time. Really good resource. I actually use Youglish more often. Yeah, Youglish. That's also a good resource. Youglish is more for like grammar and like general pronunciation, where like Forvo can help you like point out the word. Like I don't know if you can highlight a particular word in Youglish. Maybe you can. I'm just not familiar with it, but Forvo is really good for like repeating the same word and listening to it multiple times. So the weather example, yeah. I know that's what my brain goes to because it's like, what are pointless topics that I could possibly bring up because I don't have anything meaningful to say? And it's like the weather is always the first thing, right? Because you could just look outside and you say, oh, the weather. Nope, don't care. Susan Cain has written about introverts. There's a book called Quiet. I haven't read it yet, but I watched her TED Talk. So interesting. I could write some of those things. Interesting. I might check that out. Um, but yeah, all I'll say for me, it's really bad. Like I can, if I absolutely have to, and I force myself, I can be more introverted or extroverted. But I've taken and I know that these tests, like, I mean, they're not, 100% infallible or this, that, whatever. They're just kind of like, you know, generally useful. But the Myers-Briggs personality test, I've taken it like 3 or 4 times for various reasons, and almost every time my introvert versus extrovert score is always like at least 90% introvert. 90%, that's pretty high. One of the times I took it, it gave me I think like 96 or 97% introvert. So I basically just want to hide under a rock all day, which sounds about right. Yeah, just let me hide under a rock all day and I will be perfectly fine with my thoughts. And yet I like languages, and here I am teaching you guys how to speak English. So it's a strange world that we live in. Very strange world. But that's okay. So we're at 3 hours. 3 hours. If necessary, we can go another. Well, we have about 20 minutes until 3, so we can go another 20 minutes if there are any other questions. If not, we can end here. So um, let me know. I'll give you a little bit of time here to ask another question, but otherwise, we'll finish it up. We'll wrap it up. Thank you for the great live stream. I'm going to bed. I'll respond to everything on Patreon tomorrow. Have a great day, and yay, introverts for life. Yes. Perfect. All right. Well, have a good night. And yeah, I'll hear from you tomorrow. Thank you for coming and asking awesome questions. Any other questions from anybody? Now's your chance. You have to wait a whole week. Well, I mean, you could leave comments, but that's not live. Who is this? Oh, got it. Yeah. Back over to here. Thanks so much. Have a good one. Okay. Yeah, Rodrigo saying bye. David saying bye. I think that's about it. Oh, I missed a comment here. How did I skip over that? From Evo. Sorry, my bad. I was talking about the S in emphasize. Oh, got it. But thanks for your answer. Well, we were focusing on the at the end of the word, so that's where I went. Indeed, inputted everything even more in English. Yeah, but yeah, that S in emphasize. That one is an S. Um, so good. Um, Sometimes compounds can help with that too, because it's like, I mean, emphasize is not two words put together, but like it's almost like size is inside that, and so it's very likely that we're not going to magically say size just because it's in the middle of a word. Um, so that can also like maybe give you a hint. Again, no guarantees, but it's pretty likely that if we have an individual word with that piece of a bigger word, it's probably going to be the same, just an S or Z if it's normally a Z. So, okay, well, I'm not seeing any new questions or anything, so I'm going to go. Thank you guys very much. Um, and as usual, I will be back next week. I do have some comments to address as well. So if you're waiting for me to address your comments and I haven't done so in this live stream, then I will get to that soon. Looks like we have one last minute question from Einstein. Did you say something earlier, Einstein? I could swear. Oh yeah, you were talking about the Z. That was the buzzing sound and like the. Okay. When should we use weak D or T? You're probably writing that really. I have to finish this typing. When should we use weak D or T? Okay, you said expected could be expected. Does that work with TD in past tense? For instance, don't get worked out. Don't get worked out before the. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe worked up, like meaning like they get overly excited. Well, worked up doesn't have to be overly excited, but in this context, it would be like you get too excited or too nervous because you have the interview. That would be worked up, not worked out. But yeah, don't get worked up before the interview. Work out, or definitely no. So for that, I mean, I have a lesson on the T and D that basically explains that. Um, and it doesn't matter if it's past tense, not past tense. It depends on where the sound is in the word and if it's a stress syllable or not. Um, so the weak, and this goes for all the stop consonant sounds. TB, t, g, t, d. For the weak TB and all the other ones, if it's at the start of an unstressed syllable, um, it will be weak. Okay. Now, there's also the flap, and this is why on the range, all the flap, the weak number two or the second weak sound, because it's a variation on the weak sound because it happens in the same place, but if it's at the start of an unstressed syllable and it's surrounded by two vowel sounds, then it becomes a flap D. Whether it's a T or a D, it becomes a flap D. So that little extra piece where it's surrounded by two vowels triggers it to the second weak version, which is the flap, which I think is a much more logical way to look at it instead of, you know, the way that it's usually taught. But so yeah, expected. So there's not a vowel before that. There's a vowel after it, but there's not a vowel before it. It's a T. It could be written with a D. It doesn't matter, T or D in the spelling. Now, the T also has a special thing that can happen, and that's what's also influencing this here. So when we say, if I fully enunciate expected, I could push out a T if I'm really fully clearly enunciating. Normally, we're going to say expected. And the main reason here is because we know if T plus vowel between two words, that activates the flap, right? Because it would, any stop sound that connects over to a vowel, like at the start of the next word, it becomes, instead of a stop, it activates it as a weak version. So if I say like up on, like up on the roof or something, it would be up on, up on, up on. Um, or I could still style and say up on, but normally we're going to flow it, link it together, and do a weak P there, right? Up on, up on. So what the T does, it'll do the same thing as all the other stop sounds, except in American English, um, this will also trigger the flap. Now, if the sound before it is a vowel and it connects over to a vowel, then it's definitely going to be a flap, but it doesn't necessarily have to be um, preceded by a vowel when it connects, right? And you could, this is kind of a gray area where you can look at it as a T that is sort of being weakened by the previous sound, like the K is sort of weakening it. And so it kind of just sounds sort of like a D instead. Um, or you could look at it as it's actually changing to a D when it connects. But it doesn't really matter. It sounds more or less like a D. And so that can potentially apply inside of words. Just like if I say wanted, no, that's a different case because the NT plus vowel will erase the P. That'd be wanted. Waited, okay? Waited, waited. Now it's surrounded by the two vowels. It's flapping in the middle. Waited, waited. Even though it's not connecting to a new word, it doesn't matter, okay? So with expected, even though that vowel is not before it, it kind of still wants to flap and connect. And it's not actually flapping necessarily, but it is sort of becoming more of kind of a D sound instead of like expected. Tid. That's kind of more like a T where expected did. It's just kind of easier to have it as a D. So with worked up, right? Worked up, worked up. Don't get worked up, worked up, worked up. Now, in this case, it is spelled with a D, but the same exact thing is applying as I just talked about with expected, except now it's between two words. So the pronunciation works exactly the same. I hope that makes sense. Hey, what an impeccable coincidence to find here. To find. Actually, I really admire your efforts that you've done and still doing for assisting people getting a better accent. Well, thank you very much. And sorry, it took me a second to acknowledge your comment here, but thank you for coming in and leaving such an awesome comment. What impeccable coincidence to find here. Probably, I think you mean to find you here, maybe. Probably because you just saw that I was live streaming. I guess that's why. But yes, I'm actually finishing up. Einstein's asked me a last minute question, so I wouldn't be here. So you can thank Einstein's. And we still have a little bit of time if anybody has any other questions. Instead of trying to type out a long question, if you have a question, you could just say like yes, and then I'll wait for you to type your question. But if I don't see anything, nobody has anything else to talk about, then we'll be ending. This phone, go back. I got a new phone. It's fancy, and it has this nice case. I got another case for it, and it wasn't all that great. But now I got this case, and it's really great. So, yay. But anyway, it's not even an expensive phone anyway. It's just fancy compared to the one I had before, because I don't usually buy expensive phones. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Not seeing anything. So I think I'm going to end the stream. So thank you all very much. See you next week. And yeah, make sure to bring questions that you have next time. Or you can leave them in the comments and I'll try to get to them throughout the week, but you can always bring them here as well. So see you guys next time.